back to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines of the region. It's currently 7 a.m. in New York and 2 p.m. here in Israel. I'm India Naftali, and here is your roundup of the latest developments. And to begin, the IDF announced that it has destroyed a Hamas terror tunnel stretching approximately 2 kilometers in length in northern Gaza. According to the army, the tunnel was located in Beit Lahia area near the Israeli side of the Gaza ceasefire line known as the Yellow Line. The IDF describes the underground route as an offensive Hamas tunnel designed for attacks against Israeli forces and nearby communities. The operation was carried out by troops from the Gaza Division's Northern Brigade, working in close cooperation with the elite Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit. According to the army, these forces have been operating for months in the area, targeting Hamas terror infrastructure both above and below ground. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts continue, with the United States working to transition from Phase 1 to Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire plan. Israel has made it clear that any further progress depends on security guarantees and the complete disarmament of Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Gaza was a central issue in his recent summit with U.S. President Donald Trump. Take a listen.
התנאי ההכרחי זה שהחמאס יתפרק מנשקו. אין אפשרות אחרת. זה תנאי הכרחי ויסודי למימוש תוכנית 20 הנקודות שלו. לא עשה שום ויתור בזה ולא הראה שום גמישות בנושא הזה.
Now in Judea and Samaria, the IDF has conducted wide-ranging operations over the past week, arresting suspects and seizing terror funds. The army arrested about 100 Palestinian suspects and confiscated more than 1 million shekels, approximately $310,000 in terror funds. The operations were carried out across multiple sectors, including Judea and Samaria, with a focus on the Hebron area. The Binyamin and Samaria brigades led nighttime raids in about 24 villages. In Kabatia, the IDF apprehended 16 subjects and seized 26 illegal drones. In the Ephraim brigade and in Kalkalia, they arrested 6 terrorists and arms dealers. And the Eitzayoni brigade in Judea detained suspects who had attacked civilians and soldiers, seizing a hunting rifle and ammunition. Defense Minister Israel Katz has urged the IDF to prepare for the possibility of large-scale terrorist infiltration similar to the October 7, 2023 attack. He praised the year-long campaign in northern Samaria, which led to an 80% drop in terror activity. Thanks to targeted operations, resident evacuations, and a continued military presence, the IDF says it will continue to maintain pressure on terror networks to protect Israeli civilians and secure the region. And in a tragic turn of events, 3 Jewish teenagers, including an Israeli citizen, have now been confirmed among the dead in the devastating New Year's Eve fire at a Swiss ski resort. 15-year-old Charlotte Nidam, an Israeli citizen who also held British and French citizenship, was formally identified after her remains were located with assistance from Israel's Zaka rescue and identification teams. Also confirmed among the victims are 2 Swiss Jewish sisters, Alicia Gunst, aged 15, and Diana Gunst, aged 14. The sisters, members of the Jewish community in Lausanne, are the youngest victims identified in the disaster. Israeli authorities say it remains unclear whether the sisters also held Israeli citizenship. The fire broke out shortly after 1:30 a.m. during New Year's celebration at a crowded basement bar in the Kranz, Montana resort. Investigators believe sparks from small fireworks attached to champagne bottles ignited flammable ceiling material, causing the fire to spread rapidly. Panic and blocked exits led to a deadly stampede. At least 47 people were killed and more than 100 injured, many with severe burns. Swiss authorities have opened a criminal investigation into the bar's management on suspicions of negligence. Police say all victims have now been identified. In Sydney, Australia, heroes of the Bondi Beach Hanukkah terror attack received a powerful tribute during a ceremony at the Sydney Cricket Stadium. Thousands of spectators, along with the Australian and English cricket teams, stood in applause for Ahmed Al-Ahmed, the Muslim man who confronted and fatally shot the terrorist Sajid Akram and 14-year-old Haya Dadon, a Jewish teen who protected 2 young children during the attack. Al-Ahmad entered the stadium with his hand heavily bandaged, while Dadon arrived on crutches, visible reminders of the serious injuries they both suffered. The crowd gave them a long-standing ovation as the names of the 15 victims were displayed on giant screens with the words, "Forever in our hearts." Leading the procession were emergency services personnel, including paramedics, doctors, and police officers who responded to the scene. While even some who were off duty, members of the Jewish community joined in, receiving a strong show of solidarity and respect. The stadium announcer thanked the heroes and the community, praising their courage, service, and compassion in the face of tragedy. Ahmed Al-Ahmad and Haya Dadon stood humble and moved, a reminder of the bravery that saved lives on that fateful Hanukkah night. Senior Israeli and senior officials are holding rare U.S.-mediated talks in Paris, a significant and unusual step aimed at stabilizing one of the region's most volatile borders. The meetings are taking place today and tomorrow, according to Axios, and are being mediated by U.S. envoy Tom Barak. This is the fifth round of contacts between Israel and Syria, and the first in nearly 2 months, after talks stalled amid deep gaps and resignation of Israel's previously negotiator Ron Dermer. The renewed push follows direct pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who raised the issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during their meeting last week at Mar-a-Lago. According to Israeli officials, Netanyahu agreed to resume talks but made clear that Israel's security red lines will not be compromised. The discussions are focused on a possible security arrangement, including demilitarizing southern Syria and addressing Israel's military presence following the collapse of the Assad regime. Netanyahu said Israel's goal is a quiet northern border and protection of Syria's Druze community. Israel's delegation, led by Ambassador to Washington Yechiel Leiter, alongside Major General Roman Goffman and Acting National Security Advisor Gil Rech. Syria is represented by Foreign Minister Assad al-Shabani. Officials stress no breakthrough is expected yet, but the very fact that these talks are happening is seen as strategically significant. And now with us is Dr. Nir Boms, a Syria researcher who is here to break this all down for us. Dr. Boms, thank you so much for being here.
Here.
And now, Dr. Boms, what makes this round of talks between Israel and Syria different from previous Israel-Syria contacts that stalled?
I think we'll have to see if it's going to yield results, and then we'll see if it would be different or not. In July, shortly before the Sweda events occurred, when the massacre in the village of Sweda that had to do with a violation of some of the understandings that had reached just days earlier in Azerbaijan, where the talks were previously held. We were actually very close to a security deal, a security agreement, and perhaps some had also argued to a potential broader framework of an agreement between Israel and Syria. Days before the Sweda events, we had an event at the Israeli Knesset where a Syrian who was attending meetings with Ahmed Ashara on this very issue came and spoke publicly at the Israeli Knesset, speaking about the chance for a security agreement. And then the events, we were taken by events, and the security agreements was not reached, partially because some of the terms on the ground have changed. The fact that so many militias that came to the Israeli, closer to the Israeli border, attacking Druze, but not just, was one of the conditions of the agreement that was at work. So the fact that the Syrians have brought weapons, heavy weapons, toward Sweda and toward the Israeli border was a second condition that was violated. And the fact that the Syrians were not able to agree on how to sort Sweda and how to create a humanitarian corridor was also a problem. Although with time, I think it is safe to say that the two sides actually have a certain interest to create an agreement. And I think that one of the things that was discussed in Mar-a-Lago was that President Trump would like to see all of these arenas become more stabilized. And he pushed Netanyahu to give the order to renew these talks. And he did the same thing with the Syrians, with the hope that some agreement could be reached. And I think that some of the time that had passed, really since July, may enable us to come to terms, not perhaps with the same agreement we had, but perhaps with an initial step in this direction.
And as you mentioned, President Donald Trump, how central was U.S. pressure, particularly from President Trump, in restarting these talks?
I believe that the American push here was important because the two sides were not able to come to terms separately. And I think that the president and the prime minister, when they spoke, had a number of agendas in mind. And for the prime minister, the Syria file is one that has the potential, at least, to be more contained. It's not that there is a great degree of trust between Israel and this current administration of Ahmed Ashara, but there's still understanding that there may be a way to give a chance to a different security arrangement in the border and perhaps even beyond. And I would say that somebody who's been deeply involved in this, that we actually have people that we can work with on the other side. The question is, will the Syrian government be able to really push to the side the Islamists, the militias? Some of them were actually now part and parcel of the Syrian military, and let the more pragmatic leadership also in the south prevail, or whether they will continue something that was a very difficult trajectory. The Sueda massacre came following another massacre in April and beforehand in March with the Alawites, and we've seen a lot of violence and attacks against minorities. And broadly, this is something that is not just unpleasant to see. It also means that Islamists and militias and sometimes other foreign influences are very still present, and that the Syrian government is not able or perhaps not willing to push against them.
And I want to circle back to the security of those minority groups. But first, Israel has said its security red lines will not be compromised. What specifically are those red lines?
Israel basically articulated three main demands. It asks for demilitarization, and the demilitarization means mainly with heavy weapons on a line south of Damascus. Israel did not wish to see significant military infrastructures developed closer to its border. Israel did not wish to see the presence of foreign militias, Islamists, groups that broadly have an agenda similar to the agenda that we've seen in our border when we've had groups such as Jabhat al-Nusra or even Al-Qaeda and ISIS. That was the case at the time of the Syrian war, and Israel said that it very much would not like to see these groups coming closer to it, and it would like to see the Syrian government being more assertive when it comes to that. And it also said that it will not allow the minority file to become an issue. Israel said it will protect the Druze who are present in the south. Israel broadly stated a position that is at this point a consensual position also in the United States and elsewhere in the world, that Syria needs to adhere to the vision that its own president articulated. It needs to be a country that protects and respects its minorities, that respects basic human rights, and that becomes more pragmatic. So if there's going to be another attempt to create a massacre, as was the case in July, Israel said it will intervene.
And as you said, demilitarization is one of Israel's demand. Is demilitarizing southern Syria realistic given the current power vacuum?
Well, this is a big part of the negotiations and how this is going to be done. Israel have taken positions up to 15 kilometers in the demilitarized zone, and Israel has been conducting some military operations. The Syrians obviously do not like it. They would like to reclaim their sovereignty, and they would like to say that they are able to take over the security. Of course, for doing that, they need some security infrastructure. It may be more police and less military, and perhaps we need to agree, as we have agreed in 1974, of how much military forces are going to be allowed. We have a similar agreement with Egypt in the Sinai, and we're now looking again at whether we need to change some of its parameters in the context of fighting terrorist elements and ISIS in the Sinai Desert. The same probably in the Golan Heights. I don't think this is a fait accompli in the saying, it's all or nothing. I think that there are ways to think about what is the relevant presence that can be accepted, that even can be a part of an agreement. I think Israel has an interest that some of these militias are going to be handled by the Syrians. And I think the Syrians have the same interest because they understand that if they're not going to be handling some of these forces, then Israel will have to act something that, again, creates sovereignty issues for the Syrians. So if there is a way that the Syrians will actually be responsible for this, I think it's a win-win for both sides.
And that leads me to wonder, if we do eventually get to some sort of security arrangement, what could actually guarantee that that arrangement holds over time?
Well, this is why we need to have agreements with clear terms that deals with what happens even if there is either a violation or a problem. I think Israel broadly claims that it seeks to make sure that security is going to be ensured and that it will have the rights to act if there is a violation. And we have a similar understanding and actually implementation of this type of arrangements in both Gaza and in Lebanon. And when there are violations, Israel acts. The broader vision is not to have violations, to actually have security and to actually have a Syrian government that is committed not just to the safety of the borders, but also to the construction of Syria and to the influence of more pragmatic and moderate forces rather than Islamist forces or foreign forces. That's what created the Syrian war. It is something that I believe neither Damascus nor Israel would like to see again.
And for my last question, and going back to the security of minority groups in the region, how significant is the protection of Syria's Druze community in these talks?
The Druze community is a sensitive issue for two reasons. One, the Druze community happens to be a community that is located next to Israel. They are physically located, some of them right adjacent to the border and some of them broadly in the south of Syria. And therefore, separately from the fact that they're Druze, the attack against minorities by these militias also means that militias are coming close to the Israeli border. So this is something that Israel had to act upon irrespective of the Druze community per se. The second issue that made it more complicated, of course, is that the Druze are a family. There are 150,000 Druze in Israel. Some of their own family members are actually living in Syria. So this issue has become a more sensitive issue. Many of the Druze in Israel also serve in the IDF. So that reason made this particular issue slightly more sensitive in Israel. But the broad understanding here is that the issue of minorities is important not because they are Druze or because they are another minority. They're important because this is the DNA of the new Syria. Syria needs to be a country that protects its minorities and that preserves human rights. A country that is able to accept its diversity inside will be a better neighbor for us and accepting diversity outside. That's the Syria we would like to see. And I know that there are many in Syria who are working toward this vision, and I think we need to encourage them.
Dr. Bruns, I couldn't agree more. And thank you for your incredible insights. We look forward to having you back.
Good to be here.
And finally, rights monitors say the demonstrations in Iran have led to violent clashes between protesters and Iranian security forces. The Kurdish rights group Henga reports at least 17 dead, while the Hanra activist network says 16 people were killed and more than 580 arrested. Iranian state media has confirmed some deaths and arrests, but has released lower figures. The protests are described as the largest in 3 years, while smaller than past waves of unrest. They do come in a moment of heightened vulnerability for the Islamic Republic, with the economy in tatters and international pressure on Tehran intensifying. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the cabinet yesterday that Israel's identify with the struggle of the Iranian people, saying they seek freedom, liberty, and justice. Speaking at the start of the cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said this could be a moment when Iranians take their own fate into their own hands. Now, with us is Benham Ben Talabu. He's the senior director of FDD's Iran program. Benham, we're delighted to have you with us here on the show today.
Thanks for having me. A pleasure.
Benham, how significant are these protests compared to the previous waves of unrest in Iran?
Great question, and it's one that's been asked a lot over these past 9 days. You can tell by the nature of the regime crackdown, which even just for the latest numbers is an important sign. About close to 1,000 arrested, now close to 20, if not just at 20, reported and confirmed deaths, including, by the way, 3 children, or 3 minors, we should say. The regime is facing protests or at least unrest in at least 22 out of the country's 31 provinces. And this is historic, not just because it actually fits the past pattern of every single anti-regime protest we've seen over the past 8 years, where Iranians poured out into the streets, not seeking reform, not seeking incremental change, not coming out because they have a particular qualm with a particular policy, but because they're seeking wholesale revolution, but because Iranians are pushing past the state. And now, quite literally, it is a contest of the street versus the state, the street that is unarmed, the street that is secular, the street that is nationalist, versus the regime that is armed to the teeth, versus the regime that is Islamist, and versus the regime that is authoritarian, if not totalitarian. So this is the dichotomy at play here. And for the viewers, let me just add 2 cherries on the top as to why this matters more, perhaps, than before, and perhaps why it's different. Because anybody who's been looking at Iran over the past year, particularly after the 12-day war, where the regime sustained a significant defeat against its missile, military, and nuclear apparatus on its own homeland, and the Israelis targeted elements of the regime's apparatus of repression, they know that the country has been limping along. They know that there are political crises, economic crises, environmental crises escalating, all due to the regime's significant mismanagement over the past 4 decades that have come to the helm. But these are significant because these are the first multi-day, multi-city uprising ever since that war. There were tons of analysts here in the West, here in America, here in Washington, D.C., where I live and work, that were saying that the Israeli strikes, the American strikes would have been an impediment to Iranians being able to organize. Well, guess what? Less than 6 months later, Iranians have poured out into the streets again, defying expectations, even much of the expert class. And yes, the protests in 2022, 2023, the Women Life Freedom Movement, were significantly repressed. But even with the violence that was shown by the state against the street then, Iranians now, again, little over 2.5 years later, almost 3 years later, again, pouring out into the streets. So for all these reasons, day 9 of the most recent iteration of the anti-regime uprisings we've been seeing in the country remain significant. So I would say keep your eyes peeled on the contest between the street and the state.
And Benham, with all these cracks in the armor of the regime, how vulnerable is the regime right now, given the state of the economy and international pressure?
Well, it's incredibly vulnerable, and what regime elites, particularly political and military elites, are hoping to do is to find ways to limp along. You saw a very different response to the strikes that became protests in the first day and a half to 2 days of this uprising versus what you see with the heavy-handed tactics of today. Where just yesterday I was looking at videos coming across social media of security forces firing outside of hospitals, even. In provinces in southern Iran. So the regime is vulnerable. The regime knows it's vulnerable. There's even been reporting, I think as early as Friday or Saturday, just this past weekend, of the Supreme National Security Council, the country's chief national security decision-making body, meeting and coming up with contingency plans because, again, they know that they don't have any social legitimacy. So it's all about how the state responds to this next uprising. That will determine actually not just, I think, the future of this context, but the future of the country in Iran, and was potentially the future of the region. Make no mistake, Iran is home to the most pro-American, the most pro-Israeli population in the heartland of the Middle East, yet it's also home to the most anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic, and also most anti-American regime in the heartland of the Middle East. You guys are sitting over there in Israel right now, surrounded on multiple fronts by many different Iran created or Iran co-opted since 1979 proxies, partners, terror groups, and militias of this regime. Just imagine for a second if the script was flipped, if the street was in charge of the state rather than the enemy, you'd have a real partner.
It really is this strange juxtaposition of a regime who hates the West and Israel and America, and then a people who dearly love the United States and Israel and the Jewish people. Now, how is the Iranian security apparatus responding on the ground? Can you paint a picture for us? You touched on it a bit.
If one is looking at how both the security apparatus is responding today versus what we've seen over the past 8 years, again, as Iranians went from reform to revolution, as they pushed past the ballot box and embraced the street, you've seen the regime take a layered approach with respect to its already very diverse security forces. It has vigilante groups that it pays. It has the Basij, which is an all-volunteer paramilitary. It has the law enforcement forces, or basically the national police, which has special units known as the Yegana Vija. These are the ones doing most of the crackdown. Then you also even have the IRGC itself. And lest we forget, the Basij is part of the ground forces of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a designated terrorist organization, not just in America here, but also in Canada, as well as in Australia, by the way, with significant momentum to get that group designated in places like the UK and the EU as well. Why all of this matters is because thus far we haven't seen significant chinks in the armor of this layered apparatus of repression yet. And the key word there is yet. There are reports, particularly most recently in the Times of London, that have been escalating in Iranian diaspora media about contingency plans where, if again you have a 1979 kind of moment where either the leader doesn't fire, give an order to fire, even though he did publicly just a few days ago, Supreme Leader Khamenei came out and said to crack down on the unarmed protesters. But if you have a moment where the people doing the repression choose not to fire, then potentially the political leadership might flee. But thus far, the security forces are continuing to act on behalf of the state. One wonders if the street can co-opt the security forces. One wonders if opposition forces can message to them to get the security forces out of the way, because unlike 1979, neither the security forces nor the political and military elite in the country have anywhere to go. And that's why we should keep our eyes on how the security forces respond to the people on the street versus the orders coming from above.
And now about the big question, could these protests realistically lead to the eventual overthrow of the regime in Iran, or is this just something the Iran is going to pass through and reassert control?
Well, it depends if we're taking you could say a Polaroid or a screenshot or a snapshot of the protests versus if we're seeing them like a video or a timeline in real time. And the reason I'm saying that is because if we situate this within, again, that larger 8-year period of anti-regime uprisings, the boom and bust cycle of protests we've been seeing in Iran from December 2017 to present, which are fundamentally different from 1999 and 2009. They are not Tehran-centric, they're not Tehran-driven, they're outside in, they're from a fundamentally different segment of society. They're more demographically and geographically diverse. The slogans, the wants, the needs, the demands are anti-regime rather than being pro-reform. These are all reasons why taking a snapshot of a single protest, of a single instance of an unarmed uprising against a highly armed state, no, that doesn't look like just on the balance. If you take a snapshot of it, it's going to succeed. But if you take, a reference to one of my favorite TV shows, and I'm revealing that I'm a New Yorker still at heart, Seinfeld, George Costanza on Seinfeld, he talked about a breakup like knocking over a soda machine. You have to rock it back and forth a few times until you can push it over. And I think what you've seen, again, in that boom and bust cycle of protests is the attempt by the unarmed street to knock it back and forth and back and forth. And if we have analytically an X factor here to look at the Iranian security forces, what the West, what America, what Europe, what Israel needs to do is to draw their own X factor here to say at what point do we need overt versus covert support to the protesters? These countries in the West, America, Israel, what have you, are cyber powers. I would recommend they should be blinding the security apparatus in the cyber domain.
Thank you so much.
President Trump talking about kinetic action potentially in support of the protesters, I would say keep your eyes on the prize.
Thank you. We have to wrap this up. Thank you so much, Benham, for being here.
Thank you.
Look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
That's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. I'm India Naftali.
Prime Minister Netanyahu warns of a very severe response if Iran attacks Israel. This comes as rumors swirl around the upcoming meeting between him and President Trump. Is the Prime Minister planning to present plans for a second Iran offensive? And how will the President react as isolationists tighten their grip on MAGA? Israel Undiplomatic starts now. Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, the host in Jerusalem, and my co-host Ruthie Bloom is in New York City, where she's been there for her father's funeral and Shiva. Ruthie, I hope you're doing well.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yes, I am. And then we can talk about that. In a way, it's related to our topic today because of Netanyahu's upcoming meeting with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And since apparently the main topic is Iran, and that was really my father's pet peeve for the last several decades. So it really does tie it in. I was happy that he lived to see Israel bomb Iran and the United States join in with the B-2 bombers. Thank God he lived to see that. But he lived a full life. He's almost 96 years old. But it is interesting, I must say, during the Shiva to see American Jews and hear a lot of their perspectives, just some of which were surprising to me.
Well, you're, of course, 100% right when you talk about the Iranian issue, which is clearly front and center when Netanyahu meets Trump at Mar-a-Lago. It's clear that there's unfinished business. Now, when President Trump was here and spoke to the Knesset in the middle of October, just after the Gaza ceasefire deal was signed, and we'll discuss that later, because that's another issue, of course, on the table when the two leaders meet. But he said clearly if the Iranians start to reinstitute their nuclear program, they can expect a further strike on them. And he was leaving it a bit vague whether that would be an Israeli strike supported by the United States or whether America would join in as well, as they did last time. But he was very clear in his message to the Iranians on the nuclear program that if they do try to rebuild their nukes, if they do try to rebuild their military nuclear program, then they can expect a strike. But where it's not clear to me, Ruthie, is the issue which is of great concern is ballistic missiles. Because we saw in the 12-day war that we went through in the middle of the year that Iranians' conventional weapons can do great damage to cities across Israel, many fatalities. There's not an easy answer. We can shoot down many of these missiles before they land and explode in Israel, but unfortunately too many still get through. And you can still walk around Tel Aviv today, as you know, as a resident of Tel Aviv, and you can still see buildings damaged by the Iranian missiles. And for Israel, if they reconstitute their ballistic missile program, that's also a clear red line, as has been stated by the government of Israel. Do you think Washington shares that concern, or is President Trump only concerned about the nuclear issue?
I think that President Trump can be persuaded that that's a crucial issue. I think one of the problems with this administration is that though President Trump and certain members of administration have been extremely understanding of Israel's predicament and understanding that it's not only Israel's. We even heard Ambassador Mike Huckabee a few days ago at the INSS conference in Tel Aviv saying that he was saying that this is a danger to Europe, to the world. It's not just to Israel. And anybody who doesn't, he said something like Europeans who don't understand that are stupid. I think he used that literal word. So yes, but we have another wing of the administration, people also whispering in President Trump's ear. And that's what I call the Tucker Carlson wing, or, J.D. Vance, the vice president. He's much more of an isolationist. I've said this before. He is somebody who is trying not to alienate anybody in the Republican Party, including the real bad guys there, some of whom are out and out anti-Semites. And he's trying not to alienate them because he has his eye on the presidential primary in 3 years. So he's trying to sort of be wink at both sides, and that doesn't work in a situation like this. I also would like to remind you when you said about the ballistic missiles, you know, first of all, Hezbollah in Lebanon has also said, Iran, you got to resupply us. This isn't only Iran. Iran is the head of the snake, and we did severely weaken it. And also financially, Iran is in really bad shape. However, it would spend its last penny on trying to assert its hegemony in the region and the world rather than feed its people. And that's a big danger. But also Israelis were tired of running to bomb shelters, living in bomb shelters when there were these missile attacks, particularly from Iran. And, it's hard we can't go back to that.
So there's an issue here which is priorities, yes? If you're Israel, Iran is enemy number one. It's the most important threat. And as you said very correctly, Ruthie, Iran is the sponsor of other smaller threats, whether it's Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas, yes? But the head of the snake, so to speak, is in Tehran, and that's how Israel sees it. And Israel doesn't like the idea of Iran using this period of relative quiet, to rebuild its capabilities. And there's a question here, America, and it doesn't matter to a certain extent who sits in the White House, though obviously it's very consequential who sits in the White House, but on this it doesn't change anything. America is a global power with global interests, and they worry about China, and they worry about Russia, and they also worry about Iran. And the extent that Iran's ballistic missile program, when it's taken away from the nuclear program, just with conventional explosives, which we saw the damage they did in Tel Aviv and in other cities across Israel and the fatalities they took, is Israel going to sit down idly and allow them to rebuild their non-nuclear military capabilities? And Israel has been clear, we won't. But once again, I'm still not convinced, or I'm not sure that the Americans are on the same page when it comes to the conventional threat from Iran. It's clear. Once again, the president was unequivocal when he talked about the nuclear threat. But I'm just not sure. And this is one of the issues, among others, that I think has to be discussed between the two leaders at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh, absolutely. But this is also one of the jobs that ambassadors do. And the Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, really one of his jobs is to convey the message from Jerusalem to Washington about Israel's concerns. And because he's so articulate and he really does know how to present Israel's position, if anybody can impress upon, it's not just Trump specifically, it's not only the president, it's Congress, it's the people around the president. I think that he's a really good person to do it. Obviously, Netanyahu is the key person to do it, but we're talking about along the way and not just when he goes for his meeting at Mar-a-Lago. Now, a lot of this, we have to point out, is just speculation. And one of the reasons that we're speculating so much and trying to do, damage control, I would say, is because Axios and this its writer, its Israeli writer, Barak Ravid, spends a lot of time publishing stories that claim Trump has had it with Bibi. He's angry at Israel and he's going to give him a dressing down when it comes to Washington. And, we kind of laugh at that because every time there's such a report, the U.S. and Israel are on the same page about all kinds of very important military operations, including the last time when the U.S. joined Israel's strike on Iran, but not merely the others. So, there's a lot of joking going around like, well, as soon as Axios says that the Trump administration is finished with Israel, we know that a big operation is in the wings and is in the works.
So I'd now go to Syria, and is there a possibility that there's also maybe Israel and the U.S. are not on the same page on Syria? We saw the Syrian president, Ashara, he was recently in the White House, the first time in decades that I think maybe even the first time ever, that a Syrian head of state was hosted by the president. We saw the president speak to him very affectionately and praising him. He had said that, he's a good-looking guy, I think he said, or an attractive man, I think he said. He talked about him being a tough guy but needed in a tough neighborhood. He gave him a present. He gave a present for his wife, perfume and so forth, and the body language was very warm. Now, Israel is very suspect of this Syrian leader. That's why we've moved our forces into southern Syria. That's why we took out in the days after he took control of Damascus, we basically eliminated the Syrian military because we were afraid of that military forming into his hand, and for good reason, because this man has a record as a jihadist. I mean, he grew up in Al-Qaeda, ISIS sort of area, and now he wants us all to believe that he's a changed man. And President Trump gives the impression that he thinks he may be a changed man. So is this another area where the Israeli prime minister and the American president are going to differ?
Well, there, I think Israel and America are not on the same page, not where Syria is concerned and not where Turkey is concerned. But you mentioned Syria. So, for example, American troops were killed in Syria, and Trump said, that's it, and we're retaliating, and he did. But here is where there's a discrepancy. According to reports in Israel, there are various reports, but according to some reports, the terrorists who killed the U.S. troops were actually part of Ashara's Syrian forces that are not part of the forces that are trying to reach kind of peaceful Syrian government. So if they were part of Ashara's government forces, and Trump is trying to obfuscate that or doesn't know that and believes that, oh no, they're only Al-Qaeda, they're opposition forces, then that's very bad. Now, we don't know for certain, but I trust, since, I have to say, I trust the Israeli reports that this attack was not merely from oppositionist forces in Syria. So that's one problem, because if Trump is so enamored of Ashara, who really hasn't, I don't believe he's changed his stripes. And I know you always say we all are, we base our policies on interests. And I think, the jury is still really out on the interest, on whether we have shared interests with Ashara. And, so far, I don't think so. And with Turkey, for certain, we don't. Turkey is a bad actor. And President Trump is always saying, they're our friends, and Turkey wants to step up and take a role in post-war Gaza. And the only thing that really, I would say, is saving us from that impossible, let's say, eventuality is the fact that nobody wants to, the international force, the so-called international force, nobody wants to really step up to that plate, except, of course, Turkey, because Turkey has ill will towards Israel, wants to do something. So we're very nervous about post-war Gaza, and we still don't have the body of Ron Gvili, the last dead hostage, still in Gaza. By the way, we knew that was going to happen when it got down to the last hostage that had to be returned. We knew that Hamas would hold on to him or her.
So you're right in bringing up Gaza, which is also an important issue. Everyone's talking about moving to stage 2 of the Trump peace plan. Obviously, that's contingent on releasing the hostage, but that could happen anytime soon. The question is, the Americans just in the last few days released their plan for the future of Gaza. I think they call it Sunrise, and Gaza is going to be this marvelous place with high tech and a smart economy and prosperity. It'll be, to use the old cliche, it'll really be the Singapore of the Middle East, or the Dubai of the Levant, yes? But having said that, a lot of Israelis are very cynical. And the bottom line is this: the ceasefire from Israel's perspective is based on Hamas disarming and no longer ruling. In other words, they lose their military and political control over the Gaza Strip, and the Gaza Strip is demilitarized. That's the bottom line for Israel. That's why we agreed to the ceasefire agreement. It's part of the 20 Trump points. Gaza is demilitarized. Hamas is no longer in effective power over the Gaza Strip, no longer in political control, and they are disarmed. Hamas is disarmed. They were Israel's war aims from the very beginning of the war, and we were very, very pleased to see that Trump included them in their ceasefire arrangements. Now, it's clear Hamas is trying to weasel out. Yes, Hamas does not want to disarm. What terrorist group wants to voluntarily give up its arms? I don't think there are any. But we have to see pressure on Hamas, continued pressure. That could mean Israeli military pressure. That could mean diplomatic pressure from Hamas's best friends in the Sunni Arab world, which is Qatar and Turkey. But at the moment, the jury's out on if this is working or not. Now, should I be worried, Ruthie? And I'll ask you the following question. When Hamas spoke to the American people earlier this week, last week, in his national broadcast, he talks about bringing peace to the Middle East, right? And in many ways, I mean, he bought the ceasefire agreement, but it's clear in Gaza it's not over. And to what extent is Trump there ready to stay the course? In what extent is he happy he got the deal and now is moving on? And yet the pieces are still very much in flow there in Gaza. We're not sure what's going to happen. If Hamas refuses to disarm, we're back to square one. That means maybe a renewed Israeli military operation. If the Americans don't successfully use Qatar and Turkey like they did in the past to put pressure on Hamas to do the right thing, then we can say, kiss goodbye the chances of Hamas voluntarily demilitarizing, which will force Israel then to return to the military pressure on Hamas that we were doing before the ceasefire came in. I mean, do you think Israel and the United States are on the same page on this issue?
No, I'm very concerned about that because the two countries, we are on the same page, sort of in theory. All right. Yes, Hamas has to disarm. Hamas is not disarming. Hamas has to be disarmed, has to be defeated, has to be killed. The fact that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are already there's already sort of music going on in the background, according to which, well, we can live with Hamas still in Gaza in some fashion. Maybe they'll be in a separate part of Gaza. There's all kinds of ridiculous fantasies. It's not that the U.S. is on Hamas's side. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. But it's like, we want this fantasy. We want to have this, Riviera of the Middle East in Gaza. And unfortunately, the terrorists are screwing up our fantasy. So let's adjust it. All right. That happens a lot in international relations, particularly with Westerners who just believe that everybody just wants to get along and have peace. And you just mentioned again, Qatar and Turkey, you have to pressure them. Mark, Qatar is Hamas. Turkey is Hamas. Turkey wants Israel wiped off the map. So you're talking about mediators and people who are supposed to do this who are on the side of the enemy. So, and even Egypt, with which we have a long-standing peace treaty, Egypt has become and is acting like a hostile member of this whole situation. Says, no, we don't want to. We're not meeting with the Israelis, as though we don't have a peace treaty with them. So I'm very skeptical about all of this. And unfortunately, I have to say, Israelis, here's a big problem. When you don't have an October 7th or some major horrific thing, like in Australia, the Bondi Beach terrorist attack, when there's a dramatic event, some people say, they mean business. We've got to do something. As soon as it calms down a little bit, as we saw recently, and with Trump's 20-point plan, and yes, Israel really did weaken all the enemies in the region, everyone sort of calms down and forgets that the threat is still there.
I'd like to respond, Ruthie, by saying the following with your permission. Number one, as much as the relationship with Egypt can be challenging at times, the peace treaty has been there for getting close to half a century now, and that's a good thing, right? It's the peace between Israel and Egypt is very important for Israel's security. It's important for Egypt, and I think both sides have an interest in keeping that peace treaty. It was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country. And so far, with all the problems, with all the ups and downs, it has stood the test of time. And just a few days ago, Israel announced this gas deal with Egypt. We're selling them Israeli gas. Who would have thought that the Jewish state would become an energy exporter to an Arab country? Well, it's happened. And it's happening to the major benefit of Egypt, who's getting good gas and cheaper gas. And it's a good benefit for Israel because we're selling it. And it's building an economic relationship between the two countries, which I hope will also strengthen the other relationships. A good economic relationship can often form the basis of a stronger bilateral relationship. On the issue of Turkey, and you say Turkey is Hamas or something to the sort. I mean, I've got no illusions about the Turks, but I think it's wrong to see Turkey as Hamas. Turkey is headed by someone from the Muslim Brotherhood sort of world outlook. He's obviously no friend of the Jewish people or of Israel. He's been known to say anti-Semitic things. But I think he's more interested in neo-Ottoman empire building than he is about Hamas. Hamas is a tool for him. Hamas is an ally, but I make a distinction between Turkey and Hamas. The best example is just before October 7th, the president of Israel made an official visit to Turkey and they rolled out the red carpet and everyone was making nice. And that couldn't happen if they were Hamas. Once again, I don't deny that they can be a threat. I don't deny they can be an adversary, but they're not exactly Hamas. I think that's incorrect. But we have to discuss, before we finish, one more thing. We haven't discussed Lebanon. And there was all this talk from Washington as well, that Hezbollah has to be disarmed by the 31st of December, by the end of this year. And we're getting very close to the end of the year. And so far, though Hezbollah's military power has been significantly mitigated by Israeli military strikes, the Lebanese government was supposed to follow through. They were supposed to demilitarize the remainder, yes, the residual Hezbollah force. That has not happened. And Hezbollah remains an armed force, remains a threat, a lesser threat, but it wants to be in a position where it can make some sort of minor threat and rebuild its potential. And we're moving now to the end of the year. Israel, of course, continues to strike against Hezbollah targets when need be in Lebanon. But the question is, where is Trump on this issue? Is he now not looking at Lebanon? Because without pressure on the Lebanese government, without Israeli military pressure on Hezbollah, they're not going to follow through on disarming Hezbollah. It's obviously difficult for them to do. They're not going to do it, the Lebanese government, unless they're under pressure from America and others to do so, and to do so now.
No, absolutely. So what we have to see is how much President Trump remembers that or is reminded of those things by the people around him, because he's been extremely solid throughout. But, he's erratic, and every once in a while he says something that makes us nervous. But as long as he doesn't prevent Israel from doing what it needs to do, that's already important for Israel. It's not that we expect America to do the work for Israel, but we really need America not to threaten us or prevent us from doing what needs to be done. And as you said, we have been playing whack-a-mole in Lebanon and Gaza because all of this disarming hasn't happened. It's like we have this mini war of attrition going on, and we don't want to do it. We don't want to have to keep fighting, but we're going to have to because. And even from Egypt, drones going over from Egypt, everywhere you look, there's terrorist activity being rebuilt and being carried out. And they know what they're doing, okay? Because Hezbollah was basically defeated. But it's enough to have its little barbarian terrorists pop out of this tunnel, that tunnel, rearm a little bit to make us have to take them out. We take them out. It looks like we're the aggressors. It is part of the terrorist plan. Where they can't defeat Israel militarily, they do it on the international stage. They do it by playing the victim, etc. So that's what worries me. But I do have hope that this meeting in Mar-a-Lago, if it indeed takes place, because I think President Trump said that he something like, he hopes it's taking place next week. I mean, it hasn't been formally announced, but it's supposed to take place on December 29th. I'm hoping, since he does get along with Netanyahu, but the question is now, I'm hoping that what they are cooking between them is something that even you and I don't know exactly what's happening, and that's good. I would rather something be going on behind the scenes that we don't know about that is extremely effective and have all the hype about peace busting out all over. Uh, I would rather have something going on behind the scenes, as we've seen before in joint operations. And so we'll see. We have to wait and see.
So we've discussed, Ruthie, we discussed what's on the table at Mar-a-Lago. We discussed Iran, we discussed Gaza, we discussed Syria, we discussed Lebanon. We didn't discuss Saudi Arabia, probably because we've run out of time. And secondly, no one seems to be discussing Saudi Arabia. There was a while ago that everyone thought that there was going to be a Trump-brokered breakthrough, the extension of the Abraham Accords and a peace treaty normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. No one seems to be talking about that. I'm worried. I'm worried that because the Saudis seem to have got everything they wanted from America without a normalization agreement with Israel, that their motivation for doing so has been lowered. Because if they can get their F-35s and their economic cooperation and their strategic defense understandings all in place without making peace with Israel, what's the motivation for them doing so? But let's not go into that now. I'm just worried, unless you're correct. You said something that's ultimately very optimistic, that we don't know what's really going on when the doors are closed. And so it will be an issue. But I wanted to finish off, with your permission, today's episode. You are in New York. You were there for the funeral of your father on Friday. You've been sitting Shiva, the Jewish way of mourning, in the week following the funeral. You've been receiving guests. It's been a difficult time for you. It's been a difficult time for your whole family. Your father was a great public intellectual, one of the great public intellectuals of the latter half of the 20th century, even in the beginning of this century. He died, he was close to 96, I believe. And your father, Norman Podhoretz, was an outstanding public intellectual, speaking out on all the issues, as you said at the beginning of today's episode. International relations, American internal policy. He was a lover of America and a lover of Israel. And I just thought we'd give you the last few minutes to talk about your father a little bit, Ruthie.
All right. Well, actually, you asked me before the broadcast if I would perhaps like to read aloud what Prime Minister Netanyahu asked me to read at my father's funeral. He crafted a sort of a statement, a short eulogy for my father. So I can do that, and that sums it up. Because what, talking about my father, it's hard. Yeah, he was a great public intellectual, but he and I, most of the things we talked about, I wouldn't be able to quote on the air because a lot of foul-mouthed language, a lot of very irreverent teasing. I mean, that's the relationship we had. And, it's sort of hard to, I would say, summarize it in a few words. But I, if you would like, I can read what Prime Minister Netanyahu said about him.
Please do, Ruthie.
All right. Now I need my glasses because I can't read this. Okay. Here's this is from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sarah and I were deeply saddened to learn of the passing of our dear friend Norman Podhoretz. Our friendship spanned nearly half a century. In every one of our meetings, I gleaned much from the founts of his wisdom, the depth of his conviction, and his wry wit. The legendary editor of Commentary magazine, Norman was a towering public intellectual who influenced millions with his seminal body of work. He and his late wife and partner, Midge Decter, advocated a firm stance against the totalitarian forces that threaten America, Israel, and all free societies. Norman was an American patriot. His love for the United States permeated all he said and did. Likewise, his devotion to the Jewish people in the state of Israel was unstinting, as was his belief in the indispensable alliance between America and Israel that guaranteed peace through strength. We send our deepest condolences to Ruthie, John, Naomi, and the entire Podhoretz family. So I thought that was very lovely, and I read it at the funeral, and that saved me from having to add to the eulogies, there were some really lovely eulogies. I could never have done justice the way those did. So I preferred to read Netanyahu's statement.
So, Ruthie, I can understand that. And I want to say once again that you have the sympathy and the support of me, and I think of all the people who watch our podcasts. We wish you strength. We wish you and your family long lives. And we look forward to seeing you here in Jerusalem next week when you'll be back in Israel at the end of your Shiva. And then we'll do another episode of Israel Diplomatic face-to-face. Until then, Ruthie, I wish you well.
Thank you so much, Mark. See you next week.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines of the region. I'm India Naftali, and here is your roundup of the latest developments coming out of Israel. And to begin, senior Syrian and Israeli officials are holding rare U.S.-mediated talks in Paris, a significant and unusual step aimed at stabilizing one of the region's most volatile borders. The meetings are taking place today and tomorrow, according to Axios, and are being mediated by U.S. envoy Tom Barak. This marks the fifth round of contacts between Israel and Syria, and the first in nearly 2 months, after talks stalled amid deep gaps and the resignation of Israel's previously negotiator, Ron Dermer. The renewed push follows pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who raised the issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week at Mar-a-Lago. Israeli officials say Netanyahu agreed to resume talks, but made clear Israel's security red lines will not be compromised. Discussions are focused on security arrangements, including demilitarizing southern Syria and protecting Israel's northern border and Syria's Druze community. Next, the IDF announced it has destroyed a Hamas terror tunnel approximately 2 kilometers long in northern Gaza. The army says the tunnel was located in Beit Lahia, near the Israeli side of the Gaza ceasefire line known as the Yellow Line. The underground route is described as an offensive Hamas terror tunnel designed for attacks against Israeli forces and nearby communities. The operation was carried out by the Gaza Division's Northern Brigade, working with the elite Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit. The IDF says forces have been operating for months in the area, targeting Hamas infrastructure above and below ground. Meanwhile, the United States is working to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire plan. Israel has stressed that any further progress depends on security guarantees and the complete disarmament of Hamas. Take a listen.
התנאי ההכרחי זה שהחמאס יתפרק מנשקו. אין אפשרות אחרת. זה תנאי הכרחי ויסודי למימוש תוכנית 20 הנקודות שלו. לא עשה שום ויתור בזה ולא הראה שום גמישות בנושא הזה.
Now, in Judea and Samaria, the IDF conducted wide-ranging operations over the past week, arresting suspects and seizing terror funds. About 100 Palestinian suspects were arrested, and more than 1 million shekels, around $310,000, were confiscated. Operations took place across multiple sectors, with a focus on the Hebron area. Nighttime raids were carried out in more than 24 villages. In Kabatia, 16 suspects were arrested and 26 illegal drones seized. In Kalkilia, 6 terrorists and arms dealers were arrested. Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned of the possibility of large-scale terrorist infiltration similar to October 7, 2023. He praised the campaign in northern Samaria, which led to an 80% drop in terror activity. The IDF says pressure on terror networks will continue. And now Israel's prime minister makes a new and bold statement on the protests in Iran. Human rights monitors say the demonstrations in Iran have led to violent clashes between protesters and Iranian security forces. The Kurdish rights group Henga reports at least 17 dead, while the Harana activist network says 16 people were killed and more than 580 arrested. Iranian state media has confirmed some deaths and arrests, but has released lower figures. The protests are described as the largest in 3 years. While smaller than in the past waves of unrest, they come in a moment of heightened vulnerability for the Islamic Republic. with the economy in tatters and international pressure on Tehran intensifying. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told the cabinet yesterday that Israel identifies with the struggle of the Iranian people, saying they seek freedom, liberty, and justice. Speaking at the start of the cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said this could be a moment when Iranians take their fate into their own hands. And finally, with a heartbreaking update, 3 Jewish teenagers, including an Israeli citizen, have been confirmed among the dead in a devastating New Year's Eve fire at the Swiss ski resort. 15-year-old Charlotte Needham, an Israeli citizen who also held British citizen and French citizenship, was identified with assistance from Israel's Zaka teams. That's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. Stay with us throughout the day for live updates. Until then, I'm India Naftali. Thanks for watching.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Ladar Gravelazi, and coming up in today's newscast, Venezuela's acting president Delcy accuses Israel of being behind the U.S. operation that captured Maduro. Israeli leaders react to the U.S. strikes on Venezuela. Hear what they have to say. And Defense Minister Israel Katz orders troops to prepare for a possible return to intense combat in Gaza. Without providing any evidence, Venezuela's acting president Delcy Rodriguez is accusing Israel of orchestrating the U.S. operation that led to the arrest of ousted leader Nicolas Maduro. The false accusation is the latest in a long history of open hostility between Caracas and Jerusalem. We get more from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
Venezuela cut diplomatic ties with Israel in 2009 and has regularly used anti-Israel and anti-Zionist rhetoric as a political tool aligned with Israel's arch-enemy, Iran. The acting Venezuelan president's accusation was part of a broader pattern rather than a new claim. Without evidence addressing her nation in a dramatic TV statement, Venezuela's acting president, Delcy Rodriguez, accused Israel of being behind the U.S. operation that led to the arrest of ousted leader Nicolas Maduro, describing the strike on Caracas as a Zionist aggression.
Gobiernos del mundo están sencillamente impactados de que sea la República Bolivariana de Venezuela víctima y objeto de un ataque de esta naturaleza que tiene sin duda alguna tinte sionista.
Such rhetoric has been a hallmark of Venezuela's leadership for years, as Caracas regularly accused Israel of responsibility for regional and global conflicts. The statements came only hours after a U.S. military operation that seized Maduro in Caracas and flew him to New York, where he now faces federal charges. From Israel's strategic view, the possible collapse of the Maduro regime is more than a regional event. It could weaken Israel's enemies, led by Iran and Hezbollah. For Jerusalem, Iran is the core and existential threat, and any state that assists Tehran economically or diplomatically or operationally is seen as contributing to that danger. Venezuela is not a direct military foe and is far from Israel, but under Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro, it became one of Iran's closest partners outside the Middle East. Israeli and Western intelligence have long warned that Venezuela provided Iran with an economic and logistical lifeline, including oil cooperation, financial channels, and sanctions evasion. There have also been serious concerns about Iranian and Hezbollah fundraising and intelligence activity in Latin America. Venezuela is seen as the hub. Venezuela functioned as a distant but valuable outpost for Iran. If that outpost falls, Israeli officials believe it would shrink Iran's strategic space and weaken the networks that feed Hezbollah and other threats.
And Israel is now reacting after the dramatic shift in South America, following the U.S. military operation that led to the capture of Venezuelan President Maduro. Israeli leaders are openly welcoming what they call the removal of a dictator and signaling hope for renewed diplomatic ties with Venezuela. ILTV's India Naftali has the details. India, what can you tell us?
Yes, Lidar. What I'm about to share with you is Israel's response to Washington's operation in Venezuela. It was an operation that ended with the capture of Nicolas Maduro and his wife and could trigger the collapse of a regime long aligned with Israel's fiercest adversaries. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was among the first to react, congratulating U.S. President Donald Trump for what he called bold and historic leadership on behalf of freedom and justice. Netanyahu praised the decisive decision and the role of U.S. forces.
לגבי ונצואלה, אני רוצה להביע את תמיכת הממשלה כולה בהחלטה הנחושה והפעולה הנחושה של ארצות הברית להחזיר חירות וצדק גם לאזור הזה של העולם. אני חייב להגיד שבכלל באמריקה הלטינית כרגע יש מהפך שאנחנו רואים אותו בכמה וכמה מדינות שחוזרות לציר האמריקני ולא במפתיע גם לקשר עם מדינת ישראל. אנחנו מברכים על כך, אנחנו מברכים את הנשיא טראמפ על החלטתו, גם מצדיעים לכוחות הצבא האמריקנים שביצעו מבצע מושלם.
Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar also issued a statement praising the United States for acting, in his words, as the leader of the free world. Sa'ar continued and said Israel welcomes the removal of the dictator who led a network of drugs and terror, adding that Jerusalem hopes for the return of democracy in Venezuela and for the renewal of friendly relations between the two countries. Venezuela cut diplomatic ties with Israel in 2009 after an operation in Gaza. Under Maduro, Caracas became one of the most vocal critics of Israel, particularly following the October 7th terror attacks and the war that followed. Opposition leader Yair Lapid also responded, drawing a direct warning to Iran, saying that the regime in Tehran should pay close attention to what unfolded in Venezuela. Diaspora Affairs Minister Amichai Shikli called Maduro's capture a major blow to what he described as the global axis of evil, accusing him of running a criminal empire that funded Hezbollah and Iran. For Israel, the message is clear. The fall of a longtime adversary is being framed as not just a regional turning point, but as a broader signal to regimes aligned against the West. Lidar, back to you.
Thank you, India. And as you said, not just in Venezuela, the United States is also threatening the Islamic Republic of Iran as demonstrations against the regime sweep the nation. Could 2026 be the year that totalitarian regimes fall? In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu expressed his support for the people of Iran. All the details in the following report.
ממשלת ישראל, מדינת ישראל והמדיניות שלי, אנחנו מזדהים עם המאבק של העם האיראני, עם השאיפות שלו לחופש ולחירות ולצדק. וייתכן מאוד שאנחנו עומדים ברגע שבו העם האיראני לוקח את גורלו בידו.
As protests in Iran enter the second week, the United States is warning the Islamic Republic of Iran it will intervene if Tehran uses any lethal force against anti-government protesters. U.S. President Donald Trump said that if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, Washington will, quote, come to their rescue, adding that the United States is locked and loaded and ready to go. The warning comes as Iran faces its largest demonstrations in 3 years, sparked by collapsing currency, soaring inflation, and widening economic distress. The protests have spread nationwide with calls to bring down the Islamic regime. And despite U.S. warnings, some protests have already turned deadly as security forces clash with demonstrators. Israeli officials have also publicly backed the protests. Israel's Persian language X account posted a message praising Iranians rising against, quote, darkness. Meanwhile, senior Supreme Leader Advisor Ali Shamkhani warned that any foreign intervention in Iran's security affairs would be met with a, quote, regrettable response. And Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is vowing not to back down amid the growing unrest and U.S. threats to intervene. And joining us now with more on the latest global developments from Venezuela to the Islamic Republic of Iran is Fleur Hassan Nahum, Foreign Ministry Special Envoy for Trade and Innovation. Fleur, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's start with the obvious question, which is, what is the significance of the U.S. strike on Venezuela and the capture of Maduro, and what does this mean for Israel?
Well, first of all, I think it was the right thing to do for President Trump to look after the interests, his national interests. And we have here a dictatorship, a communist dictatorship, that is not only making its own people miserable, it's making the whole region unsafe. But it was a direct threat to the United States by importing drugs and importing dangerous people into the country. So he did the right thing. But I think what it signifies to the world is that America will not stop at anything to put its own interests first and will not suffer dangers and dictators and people threatening it. It will not suffer that lightly. And to me, that's a wonderful message to the Iranian regime. First of all, let's remember that Venezuela and Hezbollah and the Islamic Republic of Iran are very close. They enable each other's evil ways. And so Venezuela has been a harbor for Hezbollah and a way for Hezbollah to spread its evil intentions of Islamism in Latin America. And the other way around, Venezuela has also been a help, Hezbollah has also been a help to Maduro in Venezuela. And so you have two evil empires, one under severe protest from its own people, which we hope will succeed, and the other one which the United States have taken out a very toxic leader. If you want to even ask yourself why he's such a toxic leader, just look at how people are celebrating on the streets. He was bad for his country. Chavism is bad for Venezuela and is bad for the entire region.
Mm-hmm. And now Maduro has been ousted, but his government is still in place. And the acting president is, of course, already blaming Israel for the recent events. And we know there's also an opposition leader who recently won the Nobel Prize, dedicating it to President Trump. And then there's President Trump himself, who's saying that the United States is actually going to run the country for a while. So what happens now? I mean, what happens next? And who is running the country at the moment?
Well, that's a good question. I spoke to a friend of mine last night who is a leader of the Venezuelan forces in exile. He said to me, look, even though Maduro's gone, Chavism, the philosophy, the ideology behind it is not gone. It's still very much alive and well. So who's going to get rid of that? Are we going to see more American troops on the ground? Is Marina Corino Machado going to come back and take over as leader? Is Trump going to basically put her in that position? These are all still very open questions, but I think it's very encouraging that Trump said, we will go back in if we need to make sure that we don't leave this half done. He made it very clear last night at his press conference that he has to go back in, he will go back in. And that gives me a lot of encouragement for Gaza. What will happen now? Prime Minister Netanyahu was with Trump. Trump has given Hamas 60 days to disarm, which was supposed to happen in the 20-point deal that hasn't materialized. And I really do believe that if Trump says something, people should take him at face value, because again and again, he proves that he does what he means.
And he's certainly shown that with the strikes on Venezuela. And so I do want to pivot now to talk a little bit more about the Islamic Republic of Iran. And, you know, this has really been sort of a double blow for the regime. They've lost, as you mentioned, a key ally. But they've also received a very loud and clear message from Washington that the United States is not afraid to act to remove these anti-American regimes. I mean, what's your analysis of this? And do you believe that in the wake of the strikes on Venezuela, that a strike on Iran may also be imminent, either from Israel or from the United States, or potentially a joint strike?
Well, you know, for many different presidents so far have given warm words of encouragement to the Iranian protesters, but never actually did anything useful to help them. Trump did something incredible on Friday. He wrote and he said, Iran, if you keep shooting your protesters, we're locked and loaded. That was his language. In other words, we're ready to go in. Now, again, Trump doesn't say things he doesn't mean, and he acts on things that he says. And so if I were the Iranian Islamic regime, I'd be very nervous about what Trump has said, And you've seen a little bit more conciliatory language coming from them, saying that the protesters have legitimate concerns. This is all, you should take all this. They are scared. The Iranian regime are scared because now that America has basically said, you're not going to shoot protesters in our watch, that means that they have to be very careful. And I hope, I pray for the people of Iran that they will continue to be strong and resilient, and they will keep going until the regime is dismantled, because they are the source of the evil coming out of the Middle East that is spreading around the Middle East, but also the entire world.
Absolutely. Fleur Hassan Nahum, thank you so much for joining us and for your insights today.
Thank you so much.
And it's day 821 of the war in Gaza. The Israel Defense Forces say that it destroyed a rocket launcher in northern Gaza that was loaded and prepared to be fired at southern Israel in a clear violation of the ceasefire deal with Hamas. Defense Minister Katz is now ordering the IDF to prepare for a potential return to war to disarm Hamas. More from ILTV's Devo Klein.
According to the IDF, the launcher was located in a pit in the ground. It was ready for launch towards southern Israel. Troops took measures to minimize the risk of harming civilians before taking out the launcher. Meanwhile, Defense Minister Israel Katz has instructed the IDF to prepare for the possibility of a return to intense combat in the Strip, as no progress has been made toward Phase 2 of the U.S.-mediated Gaza ceasefire, and the terror group still refuses to disarm. Security sources say the order comes amid growing frustration over Hamas's position and the lack of progress on key conditions of the ceasefire. Prime Minister Netanyahu is holding a security consultation today where he will present agreements reached during his meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, with Rafah high on the agenda. According to the report, Israel plans to operate an inspection site on the Palestinian side of the crossing to verify what enters and leaves Gaza. The defense establishment also stressed that no directive have been received from the political echelon to reopen the Rafah border crossing at this stage.
And on the northern front, over the weekend, the IDF continued to strike Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon, including training sites and weapons depots, saying the activity violates the ceasefire understandings. Israel is reportedly now weighing a possible military operation in Lebanon as Hezbollah continues to rebuild its capabilities under the cover of the ceasefire. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovitz.
According to the IDF, the Hezbollah site targeted was used to train operatives for planning and carrying out attacks against Israeli forces and civilians, including live-fire drills and weapons training. The military says it also struck additional Hezbollah structures used to store weapons in recent periods. The Army says the activity constitutes a continuing violation of the understandings between Israel and Lebanon and vowed to continue acting against threats posed by Hezbollah. Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly discussed the option of expanding Israeli strikes in Lebanon during his recent meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump in Florida. According to those reports, the Trump administration is not ruling out Israeli military action, but asked Netanyahu to hold off for now to allow further dialogue with Beirut. Under the U.S.-backed ceasefire agreement, Hezbollah was required to begin disarming, starting in areas south of the Litani River near the Israeli border. Lebanese authority tasked the Lebanese armed forces with presenting a plan to ensure a state monopoly on weapons by the end of the year. That deadline has now passed, with Hezbollah openly rejecting those demands, condemning the government plan, and publicly vowing to keep its arsenal. According to Israeli sources, the terror group has used the ceasefire to partially recover, while the Lebanese government is seen as unable or unwilling to enforce disarmament. The message from Jerusalem remains clear. Hezbollah's rearmament is unacceptable, and the status quo on the northern front cannot last.
Step into the story of Israel's heartland with Blessed by Israel, where every purchase connects you to the land, the people, and the promise. Taste the sweetness of the promised land in their delicious honeys, or wear the story of the land close to your heart with the stunning Special Places of the Land necklace. Behind each product is a family, pioneers living in Judea and Samaria, crafting beauty and goodness from the soil of the Bible. When you buy their creations, you're not only receiving something extraordinary, you're investing in Israel's future. helping small businesses thrive and communities grow strong. Join a movement that celebrates faith, resilience, and hope. Visit blessedbyisrael.com and use ILTV's special code BLESSISRAEL, that's BLESSISRAEL, at checkout for 10% off on your first order. Be part of strengthening Israel, one purchase at a time.
And a diplomatic storm between Israel and New York City, just one day into the tenure of the city's new mayor. Jerusalem is accusing Mayor Zoran Mamdani of anti-Semitism after he moved to roll back city policies adopted to combat Jewish hatred and opposition to Israel. The decision has triggered sharp condemnation from Israel, major Jewish organizations, and the former mayor of New York.
On his very first day in office, New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani revoked a series of executive orders signed by his predecessor, Eric Adams, including two seen by Jewish leaders as central to combating anti-Semitism. One of those orders adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism, a widely used framework that includes some forms of anti-Israel expressions. Another barred city agencies from boycotting Israel. Israel responded angrily. The foreign ministry accused Mamdani of revealing his, quote, true face, saying scrapping the IHRA definition and lifting restrictions on boycotting Israel was, quote, anti-Semitic gasoline on an open fire. Israel's consul general in New York, Ophir Akunis, went even further, warning the move poses an immediate threat to the Jewish safety in a city home to the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. Former Mayor Eric Adams also blasted his successor, saying Mamdani promised unity but delivered division. Leading Jewish organizations, including the ADL, AGC, UGA Federation of New York, and others, issued a joint statement warning the decision removes key protections against anti-Semitism and the BDS movement targeting Israel. Mayor Zoran Mamdani says the move was not directed at Jewish issues, but part of a broader reset after he revoked all executive orders issued by Eric Adams following his indictment in September 2024. Mamdani, a democratic socialist and longtime critic of Israeli policy, says he will govern according to those principles. While he has kept the city's office to combat anti-Semitism, Jewish leaders say removing the IHRA definition sends a dangerous signal amid rising anti-Semitic incidents. The dispute is already setting the tone for a tense relationship between the new mayor, New York's Jewish community, and Israel, just days into his term.
And an Israeli woman reportedly remains missing following a deadly fire at a ski resort in Switzerland that killed 40 people and injured more than 100 last week. Swiss officials say identifying all 40 deceased remains a priority, with authorities emphasizing accuracy and respect for relatives in the process. Israel's foreign ministry said it received a report of a missing female Israeli citizen after the blaze at the Cannes Montana resort during the New Year's Eve celebrations. The ministry says it is in contact with the woman's family. She also holds citizenship in another country. The fire broke out at a crowded bar just after 1:30 Thursday morning. Investigators believe sparklers on champagne bottles may have ignited the ceiling, triggering one of the deadliest tragedies in Switzerland's history. Authorities say this work, carried out by forensic teams, is difficult and time-consuming due to the severe condition of many of the remains, and will continue over multiple days.
Là, on ne sait absolument pas combien ils étaient, absolument pas quels sont leurs noms. Inutile de dire que des papiers ou des éléments de ce type ont brûlé dans l'incendie, ou ont été détruits, là encore, par l'eau, par les projections, etc., par le fait que les secours ont évacué, pris des personnes. Enfin, il y a eu plein d'intervenants qui, heureusement, sont intervenus pour les secours, mais qui ont modifié cette scène. Donc, on est dans quelque chose qui est un petit peu le cauchemar de tous les gens qui font de l'identification.
And the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange today shifts to a global work week, moving from a Sunday to Thursday schedule to a Monday through Friday trading. December 28 marked the final Sunday of trading, with the new schedule set to take effect opening tomorrow morning. The move, initiated by the stock exchange and approved by the finance ministry, is aimed at aligning Israel's capital markets with major exchanges worldwide and attracting additional foreign investment. For the past 50 years, Israel has traded on Sundays to match the local work week, Under the new system, Friday trading will end at 2 p.m. in respect for the Jewish Sabbath. The Israel Securities Authority says the old schedule created a significant gap with global markets, making it harder for foreign investors to operate in real time and reducing Israel's appeal as a liquid global financial hub. Regulators say the change is part of a broader strategy to modernize the market, including allowing reporting in English and encouraging global listings. And with that, let's take a look at the weather forecast. Cloudy skies are expected around most of the country tonight, with temperatures reaching lows of 8 degrees Celsius or 47 degrees Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow we'll see partly cloudy skies alongside steady temperatures with highs of 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's a wrap for today's news. For the latest updates from Israel on all your devices, be sure to follow our ILTV channels and keep up with us on social media. That's at ILTV_Israel on all platforms. Stay informed with the latest news straight from the heart of Israel. I'm Ladar Gravelazi. Be well, and thank you so much for watching.
For the public, the hostage releases can feel like some closure, but for these hostage survivors, Romi says it's only the beginning. There is a sickness involved in the pro-Hamas movement, both in the terrorists committing these acts and people like Brianna Joy Gray who are justifying it. There's almost no coverage of the fact that medical professionals in Gaza use their positions as a shield for involvement with Hamas or were directly complicit in hostage-taking, abuse, and murder. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Off the Record. In today's media environment, especially when it comes to Israel and the Middle East, nuance has almost disappeared and complex realities are reduced to slogans or headlines, and anyone who refuses to pick a side is attacked. This show exists to slow things down, to take the hard conversation seriously, challenge misinformation, and make room for complexity without dehumanization. I'm Zina Rachamilova. Thank you for being here. Let's get into it. The story that dominated Israeli media over the weekend was the testimony of former hostage Romi Gonen, who spoke publicly for the first time on Israel's investigative program Uvda about her time in Hamas captivity. Now, I have to warn some of our viewers that some of the things we're going to discuss will be difficult, so please brace yourself accordingly. Romi Gonen was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th of 2023 during the terror attack at the Nova Music Festival near Kibbutz Reim. As she tried to escape, she was shot and wounded and then later abducted into Gaza, where she was held for 471 days. When Hamas began firing rockets at Israel at 6:30 a.m. that morning, Romi began describing the chaos and pandemonium as she and her best friend Gaia Khalifa tried to flee the festival. We are shown never-before-seen photos and footage of Romi hiding, along with recorded conversations between her and her father as she was trying to figure out how to escape. Romi and Gaia had to leave the car that they were trying to escape in and hide in the bushes, along with another young man named Ofer Tzarfati. After waiting there for a while, another young man named Ben Shimoni pulled up his car to rescue them. Ben had already saved 9 people from the Nova Music Festival, complete strangers. On his third trip, he came to rescue Romi, Gaia, and Ophir. But as the 4 of them tried to drive out of the area, they drove straight into a group of about 50 terrorists. They killed Ben first, and then Gaia. Romi describes watching her best friend Gaia take her last breath. Romi then gets on the phone with her mother, and in the recorded call, you can hear Ophir and Romi's heavy breathing with the sounds of endless gunfire and terrorists screaming in the background. Ophir begs Romi to leave him and save herself. Then we hear the terrorists approaching the car, while Romi plays dead, and she describes the terrorists taking her out of the car and dragging her and Ophir across the pavement into a white pickup truck. The 2 were kidnapped to Gaza. Ophir Tsarfati died in Hamas captivity, and his body was recovered by the IDF on December 1st. Romi was released on January 19th of 2025 as part of the ceasefire and hostage deal. And now, almost a year later, she has chosen to speak about what she endured in captivity, including the sexual abuse and repeated threats by her captors. Her testimony adds to the growing body of evidence that sexual violence was used against Israeli women held hostage. I don't think we'll ever fully know the true extent of what these hostages endured. Based on media reporting and the way that survivors are speaking publicly, it appears that many of them are deliberately keeping details vague. This is done for ethical and protective reasons because these are deeply personal experiences, and survivors should not have their names permanently associated with these acts online. While many are coming forward, they often speak in general terms, likely as a way to shield themselves from stigma and re-traumatization. One woman who did come forward publicly was Amit Susanna, who spoke to the New York Times about the sexual assault that she endured in Hamas captivity. Amit was kidnapped from Kibbutz Kfar Aza and was held in Gaza for 55 days. She was released in November of 2023 and became the first released hostage to speak publicly and disclose sexual assault during captivity. In the New York Times article, Amit talks about a captor named Muhammad who guarded her. She describes as he sat her on the edge of the bath. It seems to be a common theme that these hostages were harassed by their captors in the bathroom, usually while they were bathing, if you can even call it that. Amit says that she closed her legs and tried to resist her captor, but he kept punching her and put his gun on her face, and then he dragged her into the bedroom. In the article, it says that her captor forced her to perform a sexual act on him. We also know that Hamas terrorists believe that Amit was working for the Israeli military and had threatened her with violence if she didn't confess to being a military personnel. Amit at some point was held with Liri Albag, Agam Berger, and Keith and Aviva Siegel. It was actually Liri Albag who had to intervene and convince the terrorists that Amit was not working for the IDF. Amit has since said that Liri's intervention may have saved her life. Amit's story reflects some of the same terrible things that Romi Gonen talks about in her testimony. There's also stories from male hostages who were subject to sexual abuse, like Rom Braslavsky, Alon Ohel, and Guy Gilboa Dalal, who were sexually assaulted by their captors, usually in the shower. In her testimony, Romi said that there were 4 separate incidences of sexual abuse by 4 different men during her 471 days of captivity, and she describes them as different levels of severity. For many of us in Israel, the hostage releases were the most central thing to closing the painful chapter of October 7th, and we'll never truly get past it. But it was only after the hostage releases could we even really find a way to move forward, not past, but move forward. But something that Romi had said in her interview is that it has not ended for her, and we all know that the road to recovery for these hostages is a long one. And I know that this may sound obvious, but it should still be said because Romi emphasized this in her testimony. To many people around her, they feel that now that she's home, everything will be okay. We ourselves see videos of these hostages laughing and smiling and enjoying life for the first several months after their captivity, but the reality is that they're on this high after their release. They're ecstatic that they're home. Some of these released hostages are even traveling and just living life in the happiest way possible. So for the public, the hostage releases can feel like some closure. But for these hostage survivors, Romi says it's only the beginning. Romi describes living with severe trauma and post-traumatic stress, where everyday sounds can instantly transport her back to Gaza. She said that if she loses focus for even a second, then her mind can immediately take her back to captivity. She spoke about how even being in a surgery room in Israel to treat her gunshot injuries became a psychological ordeal. Remember, it was 471 days that she did not receive proper medical care for her injuries. She even said that doctors opening up a sink faucet and hearing that sound made her feel like she was being shot at. And you can imagine how severe the PTSD is for her. I know that for myself, sounds and smells can also elicit some sort of trigger. Even even when I'm outside of Israel, if I hear a loud sound of an ambulance siren or a plane that's flying really low, my body feels like it's some sort of fighter jet that's flying over me. My mind may know that I'm not in Israel, but my body reacts as if it's preparing for danger. If I hear a loud sound like thunder, or if something falls over, it can sound like the Iron Dome intercepting ballistic missiles. And so we in Israel have to go through this PTSD. And so you can imagine how much worse it is for the hostages who are living under constant fear and threats and who are living under constant bombardment during their times of captivity. Now, in her testimony, Romi describes that one of the people who sexually assaulted her was a nurse. I want to play you that part of the clip.
מוחמד הדוקטור הלך, הוא היה מגיע פעם ב-24 שעות כזה, להחליף לי תחבושות ביד. עברתי כל מיני סוגים של הטרדות, מ4 גברים שונים במהלך השבי, בדרגות חומרה שונות, והסיטואציה הראשונה קרתה ביום הרביעי שלי בשבי. עוד לא התחלתי, עוד לא קרה כלום, וכבר נכנסתי למקלחת ודברים קרו.
האירוע הראשון שרומי תחשוף כאן, הפוגע הוא אותו איש צוות רפואי שמגיע מבית החולים לטפל בפציעה שלה.
אני נכנסת להתקלח, והוא הרשה עצמו להיכנס למקלחת כי הוא אח, והוא בא לעזור לי במקלחת. ואני פצועה, ואין לי שום כוח עליהם, ואני בסיטואציה שאין לי מה לעשות בה. הוא לקח ממני הכל.
So, there you have it. 4 days into her captivity, a Palestinian nurse sexually assaulted her while Israel was still counting its bodies and still trying to understand who was dead and who was taken captive before even one soldier set foot into Gaza. This is what was happening to Romi by medical professionals. It's very wild that such evil like this can exist, and it's wild how evil certain people are that excuse or deny or whitewash what happened to these hostages. Some of us may remember the interview with Romi Gonen's sister Yarden with American commentator Brianna Joy Gray. In the interview, Yarden begged Brianna to acknowledge what was happening to Israeli women. Let's actually watch the clip.
I really hope that you specifically will believe women when they say that they got hurt.
All right, thanks for joining. Stick around.
I remember watching that interview and just being shocked over this. You have to be a very, very terrible and disgusting person to roll your eyes at a hostage family, but rolling your eyes to a family member who is talking about their loved one being sexually attacked like this is just pure evil. Evil. Hell is not a good enough place for someone like her. It's such a sickness. There is a sickness involved in the pro-Hamas movement, both in the terrorists committing these acts and people like Brianna Joy Gray who are justifying it. Romi talked about how this nurse would pretend to treat her injuries as an excuse to sexually harass her. She said that of 4 of those incidents, the 3rd time was the most severe. She said it lasted for half an hour. He, too, told her to go into the bathroom and wash herself in the sink. She says that the second assault took place after the start of the IDF ground maneuver, when her captor suddenly begun to massage her, moving his hands down toward her waist. She told him to stop and moved her mattress into another room. After that, because she seemingly defied him, he told her that from now on, she sleeps in the same room as him and he escorts her to the bathroom every time, and that he plans to handcuff her from now on. And the sexual harassment continued in the days that followed. Romi says that at times there were 2 men harassing her in the same room, Muhammad and Ibrahim. She described how one of them, Muhammad, would accompany her every time she went into the bathroom and watch her, while the other man, Ibrahim, repeatedly harassed her, grabbing her by the leg, moving his hand toward her thigh. She said that despite repeatedly telling him to stop and trying to push him away, the harassment continued in one room for 16 days. And her exact words were, "It sounds like nothing, but those were the worst 16 days of my life." During that time, they would question her about her sexual history, asking who she had slept with. She had told them that she had a husband. She made up this story so that they would believe she was married. She also stopped getting her period, which terrified her because it made her believe that she might be pregnant. She said, "My biggest fear was that something had been done to me, especially within the first days of her captivity when she was in the hospital." Her captors were convinced that she had slept with her so-called husband, which she named Yarden after her sister, just days before the festival, and that may be why she was pregnant. One of them even had brought a pregnancy test and it had come back negative. Then one day they told her that they're moving her to a new place and that she should shower because they didn't know how long she'll be able to shower again. The captor follows her into the bathroom and she says that this was the hardest instance of sexual harassment. She said it lasted half an hour, and while it was happening, she was crying uncontrollably. And she said that he was having the time of his life. It was as if he received a gift. Romi said that he then approached her with a gun and threatened her that if she ever told anyone what he had done, he would kill her. What happened was that Romi was being transferred to the tunnels, and this terrorist was trying to take one last advantage of her before she was no longer under his captivity. Now, I have no words. It's not fair what she went through. And when she describes the dissonance of looking out of the window and seeing the different world than the hell that she was experiencing in that room, I feel sick just visualizing it and thinking what she must have been feeling. It really must have been the lowest point of her life. Now, the fact that one of the men who assaulted her was a medical professional, someone tasked with treating her bullet wound, should be generating a lot of outrage, more than it has. How many more health professionals in Gaza were involved in holding hostages or in some cases killing them? Well, we have Noah Marciano, who was kidnapped from the Nahal Oz base, whose father says that she was killed by a doctor in Gaza who had injected air into her veins and then filmed it. You have Emily Damari, who is held inside the Shiva hospital by a physician who forced her to call him Dr. Hamas. Then there was a doctor named Dr. Marwan Al-Hams, who was a physician at a hospital in Rafah that handled the body of IDF soldier Hadar Golden, who was killed and kidnapped in 2014, knowing that it had been hidden in a tunnel beneath Rafah. And then we have Dr. Ahmed Al-Jamal, who was a physician that worked at a local mosque. According to some of his neighbors, he and his son Abdallah, who had written for Al Jazeera, held 3 Israeli hostages, Andrei Koslov, Shlomi Ziv, and Almog Meir Jan, in their family home in Nusrat. The 2 were known to have links to Hamas. Think about how much disinformation and propaganda we hear. And yet there's almost no coverage of the fact that medical professionals in Gaza use their positions as a shield for involvement with Hamas or were directly complicit in hostage-taking, abuse, and murder. These were doctors and health workers who exploited the trust and the protections afforded to them under international law. The silence from major human rights organizations or much of legacy media on this issue is not neutrality. At this point, it amounts to complicity, because when terror hides behind hospital walls and the world refuses to confront it, that silence becomes part of the system that enables these crimes to continue. Romi is incredibly brave for coming forward and publicly speaking about what was done to her. The courage it takes to reveal that trauma, knowing the entire world is watching and listening, it's almost impossible to comprehend. By choosing to speak out, she's not only exposing the depth of what she endured, she is forcing us to confront the true horror of it. And her testimony should do more than just inform us. It should take the international community and compel it to reckon with how it responds to when a terror organization uses sexual violence as a weapon of war. The last 2 years have not been normal. When people come to Israel for the first time in the last 2 years and learn about the true gravity of what happened here and what these victims endured, and how we respond and deal with death and destruction, it's not normal. And yet, this has been our reality. It's awful. And it's also necessary because the world needs to know and the world needs to act. We now have extensive documentation, including the report compiled by the Dina Project over the last 2 years, which presents some of the most undeniable evidence that Hamas used sexual violence as a weapon of war. The report draws on testimonies from Nova survivors, released hostages, and others who've lived through the massacre. It shows that rape, sexual humiliation, and genital mutilation were not random or isolated acts. They were coordinated and deliberate tactics of terror. I visited an intelligence center here in Israel where we saw handwritten instructions from former Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar directing operatives to document everything, to create images of burning kibbutzim and cities in order to instill fear in the Israeli population. And there was even a dictionary from Arabic to Hebrew telling women to take off their clothes and take off their pants. Sexual violence was part of the strategy, and Hamas used it as a weapon of war. And this leads to the broader question: how does the international community respond? How do we hold terror organizations accountable when they commit these crimes? The victims of October 7th included citizens from 35 different countries. This was not only Israel's tragedy, people across the world were affected, and that means the response should have never been Israel's burden alone. We need to have a proper global policy and responsibility, not like the failure of the United Nations, to protect populations from these mass atrocities. Any country that harbors or supports terror groups, whether they're hosting their leadership, like Qatar and Doha, or financing their operations like the Islamic regime in Iran, they must be held accountable under international law. This is about precedent. It's about ensuring that mass rape, torture, and hostage-taking cannot be outsourced to terror proxies without consequences. There must be legal and diplomatic accountability for anyone involved in these crimes. There must also be binding international protocol for hostage-taking when citizens of multiple countries are involved. 35 nationalities were affected. This should have triggered a fundamentally different global response than it did. Hamas is a non-state terror entity, and the world must develop a new framework for dealing with organizations like this, because this is not just about Israel. It's not simply about a conflict. It's about whether the international community allows terror groups to get away with crimes of this magnitude. Every terror organization around the world is watching and seeing how the world responds. This is not a moment of symbolic condemnations. This is about setting a universal standard that no human being anywhere can be used as leverage or as a sexual weapon of war. If the world fails to act, October 7th will not just be remembered as a tragedy that happened in Israel, it will become a blueprint for what terror organizations believe they can do next. And as we close today, I want to remind our viewers that today's episode was about truth, accountability, and the refusal to let human suffering be buried under silence, denial, or propaganda. What happened on October 7th and what has been revealed since through survivor testimony demands more than a standard of concern. It demands action, because when sexual violence, torture, and hostage-taking are used as tools of war, and the world responds with hesitation or selective outrage, that silence becomes permission. Off the Record exists to slow the conversation down, to strip away the noise, and to insist on nuance without surrendering moral clarity. Disagreement belongs in this space. Dehumanization does not. Thank you for trusting me with these difficult conversations. Thank you for choosing to listen, even when it's uncomfortable. And thank you for refusing to look away. That's it for today's episode of Off the Record. We'll see you again next time.
United Hatzalah, Israel's all-volunteer emergency response organization, is preparing for its Miami Gala coming up on December 17th. This year's event honors former Mossad Director Yossi Cohen, former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Nova Festival survivor Bar Cooperstein. Joining us now is United Hatzalah founder Eli Beer. Thanks for joining, Eli.
Thanks for having me.
So, Eli, why were Yossi Cohen, Mike Pompeo, and Bar Cooperstein chosen as this year's honorees?
Well, we have a few more honorees, but they are one segment of hero honorees, people who devoted their life to protect others. And I'll explain. Yossi Cohen, we all remember one of the things he did. We all remember the pager operation that was started years before it actually happened. It actually started in the days it started the days that Yossi Cohen was the head of the Mossad. Yossi Cohen devoted his life for the security of Israel. Many of the things that he did is never going to be exposed. And one day we'll hear about them, maybe in the future, maybe very soon. We'll hear of them in different parts of the world. He protected not only Israel, he protected Jewish communities around the world. Yes, Jewish communities in Australia, in Brazil, in Mexico. And Mike Pompeo, who I love and I'm friendly with many years, him and his wife Susan are real lovers of Israel. You know, the essence of Judaism is recognizing the good, hakarat hatov. Mike Pompeo did so much, of course, for America, but he did so much for Israel. He put his life for many, many years as the head of the CIA, the head of the State Department, put his life to make sure that also Israel is protected. Not only the United States is protected. It's still on the top of his mind. So I think recognizing these two heroes, Yossi Cohen and Mike Pompeo, who worked together, by the way, best friends for many, many years, and they still are best friends, together with a young boy, Bar Cooperstein.
Who was a former hostage.
Former hostage, but people only think of former hostage. He is a total hero, like a real true hero. On October 7th, he was there to protect people. He was there as a security guard. He was there as an EMT. His father, who I know for many years, Tala, was a volunteer of United Hatzalah. And 5 years ago, he was driving an ambucycle to save a 4-year-old child who was not breathing. And while he was driving to save this little girl who was not breathing, running to save her life, someone crashed into his ambucycle, the United Hatzalah ambucycle, and he was left paralyzed for the rest of his life. He cannot walk, he cannot talk.
Wow.
And the day of October 7th, when his son was actually in the Nova Festival saving lives, he did not run away. He stayed there. He was protecting people. He rescued people. He hit people. And then he was in the Hamas for hours. Eventually, he was caught by the Hamas and he was tortured for 738 days. So he, together with his two other heroes, are going to be honored in our gala. And I think it's going to be incredible, hakarat hatov, recognizing the good to all three of them.
Now, you're launching a major mass casualty incident training campaign. Why now, and what are the goals of this campaign?
Well, if you think about what Bar Cooperstein actually did on October 7th in the Nova Festival, he had to decide. He was one of the only EMTs there. He had to decide between hundreds of people. Who do you treat first? Who do you treat? The one who's yelling the most, or the one who has the most blood, the one who's not yelling, the one who's unconscious? We as EMTs, as paramedics, and even doctors, we need training for triage. God forbid another event like this happens, or it could be a natural disaster. It could be an earthquake. It could be a lot of different fires or many other things where people injured. We had the Meron tragedy. All these terrible incidents, you need to have training for the volunteers. We took upon ourselves that 2026 will be the year of training for mass casualty incidents. Every volunteer of ours should know what to do when he has 100 injured people in front of him. And he should know, or she should know, that who you run first, not the one who's yelling first, not the one who's that. You should know what to do. It's a very complex training. And it's not only theory, it's also actually giving them the feeling. We're going to put them in places where they have people screaming and yelling and smell of flesh and fire and noises of bombs. And that's where they're going to have the environment of training. And I think that's going to benefit Israel tremendously.
Sounds really tough, but super important. And so is your work. Eli Beer, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Defense Ministry has delivered the IDF its first combat-ready Iron Beam high-power laser interception system, marking a historic moment in modern warfare. More on this from ILTV's Devo Klein.
The Iron Beam system, developed by Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, has successfully intercepted rockets, mortar shells, and drones during extensive testing, and from today, it's in full operational use by the Israeli Air Force. The Iron Beam will be integrated into Israel's multi-layered air defense array, alongside the Iron Dome, David Sling, and the Arrow 3 systems. Defense Minister Israel Katz called the handover a historic occasion, saying this is the first time anywhere in the world that a high-power laser interception system has reached operational maturity, adding that it changes the rules of the game and sends a clear message to Israel's enemies. Defense Ministry Director General Amir Bar'am said the delivery marks the transition from development to serial production and is expected to significantly improve Israel's defense capabilities while dramatically lowering the cost of air defense against expensive aerial threats. Air Force Commander Major General Tomer Bar called the moment especially significant, saying Iron Beam is a critical addition to the air defense battle proven during the war. The system is also known as Or Eitan, named in memory of Captain Eitan Oster, killed in combat in southern Lebanon in 2024, whose father, one of the system's developers, recited the Shehecheyanu blessing at the ceremony.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines of the region. I'm India Naftali, and here's your roundup of the latest developments coming out of the region. This just in, Iran responded sharply today, accusing Israel of trying to undermine its national unity. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Bakai said the Zionist regime is seeking to exploit the situation to sow division and called on Iranians to remain vigilant. He also accused Israeli and U.S. leaders of inciting violence as protests continue to spread across the country. This comes after Israel's prime minister made a new and bold statement on the protest in Iran. At least 20 protesters have been killed in clashes with Iranian security forces, according to human rights groups. The protests are described as the largest in 3 years. While smaller than in past waves of unrest, they come at a moment of heightened vulnerability for the Islamic Republic, with the economy in tatters and international pressure on Tehran intensifying. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told his cabinet yesterday that Israel identifies with the struggle of the Iranian people, saying they seek freedom, liberty, and justice. Speaking at the start of the cabinet meeting, Netanyahu said this could be a moment when Iranians take their fate into their own hands. Now, senior Syrian and Israeli officials are holding rare U.S.-mediated talks in Paris, a significant and unusual step aimed at stabilizing one of the region's most volatile borders. The meetings are taking place today and tomorrow, according to Axios, and are being mediated by U.S. envoy Tom Barak. This marks the fifth round of contacts between Israel and Syria, and the first in nearly 2 months after talks stalled amid deep gaps and the resignation of Israel's previous lead negotiator Ron Dermer. The renewed push follows pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who raised the issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week at Mar-a-Lago. Israeli officials say Netanyahu agreed to resume talks, but made clear Israel's security red lines will not be compromised. Discussions are focused on security arrangements, including demilitarizing southern Syria and protecting Israel's northern border and Syria's Druze community. Next, the IDF announced it has destroyed a Hamas terror tunnel approximately 2 kilometers long in northern Gaza. The army says the tunnel was located in Beit Lahia, near the Israeli side of the Gaza ceasefire line known as the Yellow Line. The underground route is described as an offensive Hamas tunnel designed for attacks against Israeli forces and nearby communities. The operation was carried out by Gaza's division's Northern Brigade, working with the Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit. The IDF says forces have been operating for months in the area, targeting Hamas infrastructure above and below ground. Meanwhile, the United States is working to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire plan. Israel has stressed that any further progress depends on security guarantees and the complete disarmament of Hamas. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that Gaza was a central issue in his recent summit with President Donald Trump. Take a listen.
התנאי ההכרחי זה שהחמאס יתפרק מנשקו. אין אפשרות אחרת. זה תנאי הכרחי ויסודי למימוש תוכנית 20 הנקודות שלו. לא עשה שום ויתור בזה ולא הראה שום גמישות בנושא הזה.
Now in Judea and Samaria, the IDF has conducted wide-ranging operations over the past week, arresting suspects and seizing terror funds. About 100 Palestinian suspects were arrested, and more than 1 million shekels, around $310,000, were confiscated. Operations took place across multiple sectors with a focus on the Hebron area. Nighttime raids were carried out in more than 24 villages. In Kabatia, 16 suspects were arrested and 26 illegal drones seized. In Kalkalia, 6 terrorists and arms dealers were arrested. Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned of the possibility of large-scale terrorist infiltration similar to October 7, 2023. He praised the campaign in northern Samaria, which led to an 80% drop in terror activity. The IDF says pressure on terror networks will continue. And finally, with a heartbreaking update, 3 Jewish teenagers, including an Israeli citizen, have been confirmed among the dead in the devastating New Year's Eve fire at a Swiss ski resort. 15-year-old Charlotte Nidam, an Israeli citizen, also held British and French citizenship, was identified as the victim. That's it for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. I'm India Naftali. Thanks for watching.
And I'm going to ask, it's amazing for dating, but what about Shomer Shabbat? Is there I assume that Jerusalem has the spot for. Now tell me more. Do tell.
Breaking news.
Tell me.
Tel Aviv has a massive Shomer Shabbat crowd. By the way, all the people that were living in Jerusalem, all the cool people.
Be careful here.
Moved, or a lot of the cool people, let's say, moved to Tel Aviv.
Welcome to the Jewish Matchmaker podcast. I'm Eliza Ben Shalom, your host, and I'm happy to be here today with Brian Spivak. He is a fascinating bridge builder, or what I would call a business matchmaker. He has started Barzel Media, which is the go-to agency for empowering pro-Israel content creators who face backlash and a loss in partnerships after October 7th. What began as this emergency response has grown into a powerful influencer marketing engine, creating authentic campaigns, digital strategy and storytelling, and live experiences that bolster voices on the front lines of the Jewish story. But his impact goes even further. Today, we'll explore the art and the ethics of business matchmaking, how he aligns with the right influencers and with the right businesses and brands. And with his permission, maybe we'll dive a little bit into his own personal dating. Brian, thanks so much for being with us.
Eliza, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. So do we have your permission to dig into personal things later on?
Yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, there's new privacy laws, so we just have to ask for that.
Yeah.
But let's start with business. What inspired you to launch Barzel Media, and why did you see influencer marketing as a form of this economic iron dome?
Yeah, good reference on the economic iron dome. Yeah, so the story got started right after October 7th. I started volunteering at the Hostage Forum. I built and ran the influencer program, saw that it was necessary, nobody was doing it. And my aim there was to ensure that influencers and celebrities could be a positive voice for the hostages and really tell the individual story about the hostages, who they are, what would they be doing right now if they weren't in captivity, what foods they like to eat. And so we'd actually partner them up with content creators that would tell that story, that human story. Actually, I hate using that word human now because of, Chris Martin and Coldplay, but really the human side of the story. And one of the things that I noticed was that influencers and celebrities who were standing up for Israel and the Jewish people, they were actually suffering in their own right. They were getting harassed online. They were losing followers. But most importantly, in my opinion, they were actually losing their brand partnerships, which is their only source of income most of the time. And so basically what happened was after October 7th, these brands said, you're speaking up on behalf of the hostages. You're speaking up on behalf of Israel. We don't want to work with you anymore. And people lost tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some people lost their entire careers.
Wow.
Some people actually have still yet to recover from it. So it's a very, very serious issue. And I decided to actually do something about it. And so
I'm dubbing you as the business matchmaker.
Sure.
Because you brought together influencers, brands, hostages, people that don't have a voice, and you gave them a voice and you gave them a place, and you were that connector that brought them together. So you really make some fantastic and smart Jewish alliances and matches. So on behalf of the Jewish people, thank you for speaking up about all of this.
Thank you.
Can you walk us through how you match the influencers to the campaigns? Like, what filters do you use for alignment of values and audience? I have my own matchmaking metrics. Like, what are your metrics?
Yeah, so it really depends on the campaign because we run a variety of campaigns. We work with nonprofit organizations that are helping to raise money to feed the Jewish people. Leket is an example of that, which you've done a campaign with them. And we work with organizations that are helping to heal soldiers. We work with so many different types of companies. We also work with for-profit companies. And we also work with information-based campaigns. So sometimes to spread a specific message, let's say about Iran, or to bring more awareness about the Druze in Syria. So depending on the campaign itself, we need to find a specific set of influencers that can really tell that story. And what we do is we really try and tap into the creator's creative capability, what they would typically do, and make sure that it aligns with their ability to then create that content and tell that story. So there's no cookie cutter, this is exactly what you have to do.
I'm telling you, I'm smiling because I'm like, this is matchmaking. You literally take the values of who somebody is, what they're doing, and you help them to match with the right people that need a message to get out there. So it's an alignment, so it doesn't feel like a mismatch or you're just marketing something that doesn't even speak to you.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
I got your back here. New marketing angle, matchmaking. Do you have a most meaningful campaign in mind, or something that you've orchestrated and put together that had a profound impact where you look back and you're like, I did something good there? I mean, you're proud of all your work, but something that specifically gives you that nachas and that joy?
Yeah, I think definitely this campaign we're working on with an organization called Beit Binyamin. They're helping soldiers who are suffering from PTSD, who have just, people really need a break sometimes. And so it's a healing center located in Tzfat. And so we're working with them.
You connected me with them, and I spoke with Jen, who is the mother of Binyamin, who is a soldier who fell. And she is a light. Wow. Wow.
Incredible.
She is so passionate and so, you think of somebody who's gone through tremendous loss, and she has such a positivity and a motivation to take her mission and help soldiers and their families gracefully get through these time periods right now at her retreat and her center. Beit Binyamin is such a gorgeous organization.
100%, yeah. And then also another campaign that comes to mind was when everything was happening with Iran, that 12-day war. I was working on this information campaign to amplify the message about Iran's atrocities against the West. And that would give Israel this kind of what's the word I'm looking for? That would give Israel this little support that we needed from the West. And so when all the rockets were raining down in Tel Aviv and all across the country, it was pretty meaningful to know that I was actually doing something on the information side, on the PR campaign side, that would really affect Israel and the Jewish people.
So how do you measure these KPIs when we're looking at, key performance indicators of what? What is it? How many clicks? Is it how many likes? Is it how many donations? What to you makes this a successful match and a successful campaign?
It's such a good question. And it's a question that I get all the time because people, we have brands and companies and organizations investing this money. Okay, great. What am I going to get out of this? And so things need to be tangible, but there's also tons of intangible things that we are providing. So of course there's donations, there's likes, clicks, views. How many views did this video get from this influencer, etc. But ultimately, it's the intangible things that actually, in my opinion, bring them the most value. They might not see it right away.
Maybe like a mindset shift or an awareness of an organization that, like Lekit, for example. I actually ran one of those campaigns, and it happened to be during the 12 days. And I was like, you think you're worrying about missiles? People still need food to eat. Right?
Exactly.
I understand we need shelter, which we also need. And there are people that still don't have the next meal that need somebody to support them. And like you said, humanize the story
100%.
And get it out there. And it was powerful.
Exactly. It provides this connection that maybe didn't occur into the viewer's mind as to why this thing might or should matter to them. It's, it's advertising in a lot of ways. And what's also really unique and special is that, especially if when we work with nonprofit organizations, their fundraising teams would actually let the social media team know and say, by the way, all that effort that you're doing in the influencer marketing side is helping us raise more money. It's making our job easier because they're like, oh, I saw that video with this person. So when you make that phone call to try and collect, it's much easier when you're like, oh, I already know. And I saw this person who I love and I follow. It makes that fundraising aspect much easier and stronger.
So how do you build trust with these influencers and brands? Because on both sides, as a matchmaker, I have to also build a relationship, build trust with the people that I'm working with. And you're like me, you're working with both sides. You're working with the influencers that are getting the word out there. You're working with the people that want to get the word out there. How do they know that they can trust you? They look at your punam and they go, this is a guy that I can trust. What is it about you, or in what way do you approach them so that they know, I can get this done for you. I'm somebody that you can rely on, and we can make a difference to the Jewish world?
That's a really good question. I've never been asked that. I think one of the things that's important to me personally, I take my personal reputation very, 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 very seriously. And if there's ever an incident where I think that something can be potentially perceived as negative, I try not to even walk into that scenario. I always err on the side of caution. And sometimes we've had disputes with a brand having certain expectations, and it's kind of a gray area, right? Well, the influencer kind of delivered on this, but technically, yeah. And sometimes I'll say, you know what? You guys are actually kind of both right. I'll eat the cost. I've done that before where I've just said, you know what? It's more important that both parties feel happy than for me to try and say, no, you're really wrong, and technically this. So integrity
is what I'm hearing.
Integrity and honesty, because people will say to me, well, how do I know it's going to work? And I'll tell them, I don't. I can't guarantee you that this campaign is going to work. I don't know. And I try and just be really, really transparent. We've worked with this person in the past. They've delivered. But what was hard is that when I started the company, people needed to trust me.
And you couldn't say that.
I couldn't say
you
that.
had no history.
Exactly. I had no history.
No success.
No success. And so there was a lot of just like trust that this needs to happen. We need to try it. And now, thank God, I'm very, very lucky where I've built up enough of a reputation, and also the influencers that I've worked with have built up a strong reputation that they can deliver when necessary. So that's really important.
And how often are you bringing in new influencers? Like, have you found your people, your team, or are you one of those guys that, like, in business matchmaking, always has your eye out there for the next potential match in person that you could set up?
So we always have our eyes open. We do have some go-to people that, you're one of them, actually. We have some go-to people that we really enjoy working with. And it's not just because It's actually for a variety of reasons. It's easy to work with. You are. I genuinely enjoy working with you.
So funny. This is not a promotion. It's a promotion, not a promotion, but
it's not
we're
a
talking
promotion,
all about
and
you.
yet
But
there's a book right here. Yeah. We can promote the book, which I've done, with you. So to me, it's about being easy to work with. And super creative, willing to push the boundaries and really try and think outside the box, going above and beyond, right? So if the contract says, you have to do X, Y, and Z, sometimes people will add A, B, and C because I really believe in it or I really want to do it. I want to show up and show that I'm really going the extra mile. And also whether or not you really deliver results. Like that's, those are 2 or 3 important factors.
Okay. So now let's lean into matchmaking, real matchmaking, relationships and all of that. You and I have talked about this. We've even, explored a little bit, but not so much. I don't think I've really set you up yet.
No, my mom wants you to, though, yeah.
Shout out, Mom. We're going to work on that one. So because we have your permission to talk about dating, relationship stuff, give us just a little bit about you personally so that we know who we're talking to. And if one of our listeners, by the way, matchmaking is like this communal effort here. It's got to be us to help him. So how can we know you? We now know you professionally. We got a little bit of insight. Tell us a little bit about you personally.
Sure. So I made Aliyah 11 years ago. And I am 40 years old recently. It's
the
crazy.
Age of wisdom.
Yeah,
Welcome.
no, I really feel like it. It's crazy. Like I feel like I'm a new person. Like I've just gotten this like crazy good positive energy since I turned 40.
I think 40s are fabulous. I'm now at the other end, so I'm 48.
Yeah.
But they got better, so don't worry.
It's amazing. and also I'm embracing it. I feel like it was when I was in my late 30s, I was like trying not to say it. And now that I'm like 40, I'm like, I'm owning it. Exactly.
Okay.
I have 2 daughters, so I'm divorced. 2 daughters, 2 beautiful, beautiful daughters. And I go to Chabad. I'm very active and one of the leaders in my Chabad community in Tel Aviv. I keep Shabbat. I keep kosher, but in like my own Tel Aviv way, So like people try and put me into a specific box, but it's super hard to do that. So be careful. And what else? In terms of what I'm looking for?
Oh, good.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Please, you lead the way. I'm just going to listen here.
By the way,
notes.
The last time we spoke, I was looking and we said, who knows? Like at that time, I was single, technically. I technically am still single, but I started to see somebody.
Oh, you're maybe not so available.
Maybe. I don't know. Things, I met somebody that I like,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna take this information with a grain of salt because it might be completely irrelevant.
Right. Or it could be relevant where this, it doesn't last. Who knows,
But we have hopes that it's going to last.
We have hope and we have confidence and
So maybe tell us, have you ever matched yourself before? Like, have you ever been your own matchmaker or have you had friends set you up? Like, just in general with dating, what has that looked like for you? Like, everybody, we all want to, like, take a look into your life and be like, no, is it easy? Everybody says dating is so much easier for men than women. Like, whoa. From a man's perspective, what's the real story?
The real story is I live in Tel Aviv, and Tel Aviv is
different
the best
story.
city to live in as a Jew. I don't think that there's, especially as a single Jew. Now, it can be, there's like positives and negatives with dating there. And I saw you did a podcast with the Olim in Tel Aviv group.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
They're amazing. I love them. And so, they're like the perfect representation of like what living in Tel Aviv in a, what's the word I'm looking for? Wow, losing my words today. Whatever. They're the perfect representation of what it's like to kind of live in Tel Aviv.
Fast-paced Tel Aviv lifestyle.
With also some satire and comedy to it.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I'm going to ask, it's like amazing for dating, but what about like Shomer Shabbat? Is there I assume that Jerusalem has like the spot for Now tell me more. Do tell.
Breaking news.
Tell me.
Tel Aviv has a massive like Shomer Shabbat crowd. By the way, all the people that were living in Jerusalem, all the cool people, sorry.
Be careful here.
Yeah, moved, or a lot of the cool people, let's say, moved to Tel Aviv because the scene in Jerusalem was just slowing down. There wasn't this vibrant atmosphere. And so we actually got a lot of the Jerusalem people in Tel Aviv now. Yeah, like...
So it sounds like the community expanded. Are you talking in
massively.
The last 2 months, 2 years,
I'm talking
6 years?
it just exponentially every single year, but
Wow.
but been happening since in the last 7 years, I would say.
Wow.
So it's incredible to see. People who are like hardcore Jerusalem people are now in Tel Aviv because there's this vibrant energy. It's very social. It's easy to make friends.
Right. There's where to go. There's
where to
what
go.
to do.
There's every shul that you can possibly think of exists in Tel Aviv. And also, it's one large community. It's not like one of the challenges with Jerusalem is that it's like there's a community here, and it's like, well, I can't go there because I live super far. It'll take me an hour and 20 minutes to walk there. So in Tel Aviv,
it's one community?
It's one big community pretty much, except Yaffo. Like Yaffo is kind of far, but everything's pretty much accessible in Tel Aviv. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so for any listeners who are like, oh, Tel Aviv, there's options.
And it has the most beautiful people. Just saying. Yeah.
Of course. That's where you live. So now I'm all lost the track of thought.
Sorry.
Okay, we're digging into you anyway, just because you never know. And hey, you're here. We got to get to know you. Top 5 qualities that you would be seeking in a life partner. Because I'm going to hold you to this. Because if the person that you're with matches up, I'm going to check in on you and make sure that this is a good match for you.
Okay,
so
top 5. Yeah,
top 5. Like what? I'll give you a minute to think as I talk here. What are you looking for in a human being? Whether it's qualities or values or personality, not looks, because looks is a different category.
Okay.
Just education here.
Okay, cool.
But like, what do you want?
Yeah. So one of the things that's most important to me is communication. The way that somebody communicates, how they communicate, their trust, honesty, and respect and loyalty is super important. And one of the things that actually attracted me to this person is the way that they communicated very early on. There was no games. There was no power
Direct,
hierarchy. It
clear.
was direct, clear.
Kind of Israeli. That's a very Israeli thing. Straightforward. Say it like it is. But probably
Israelis can but
with a kind.
But sometimes with Israelis, it's actually there's no discrimination here. Okay.
We're Israeli now.
Exactly.
I am.
So everyone plays games. It's
the nature of dating.
It's the nature of dating.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a nature in business matchmaking too.
Even not playing a game is playing a game.
Yeah. Right. Maybe. Yeah. But like showing up as your true authentic self and not being like, well, if I message him good morning, like before he does, I'll wait for him. No, like don't even think about that. And
be in contact, reach out.
I'm not necessarily saying that is the way to go, but that's what attracted me. So communication, very important.
Okay.
Honesty and loyalty.
Okay.
Good sense of humor.
What
Super
kind
important.
of humor? Because there's all kinds of humor.
Yes. I actually kind of enjoy and don't mind like some deprecating.
Self-deprecating humor?
Well, it's not self-deprecating if the other person's doing it, but like, poking fun. Like, I don't mind it. Like, I actually don't mind if somebody like can poke fun at me because there's an element, and by the way, you see this in friendships. In friends who poke fun at each other, there's like you actually can develop a stronger friendship and connection with that person if you're able to do that, because I know that they're not really taking offense to it. Now, you have to be able to do it very tactfully, and you have to know what that person's tolerance is, and if it's something that they are very sensitive about, probably don't make fun of that.
Okay.
Yeah, but good sense of humor, dad jokes. I love dad jokes. Yeah.
Dad jokes.
Yeah, they have to appreciate dad jokes. Yeah.
Okay. If she doesn't appreciate dad jokes, it's not going to work.
That's
your humor. That's what jives with you.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for our listeners who are out there in the dating world and they're struggling? People are listening to this from all over the world, not just located in Israel, in Europe, in America, South Africa, South America, Australia. What piece of advice or wisdom could you share with them that will help them get from today to tomorrow, from this date to the next date, because they're not there yet?
Yeah, there's actually a phrase, I think it's a Portuguese phrase that I heard. I don't know it in Portuguese, but there was a guy who would sell books on the Tayelet, and he would literally go over to every single person on the Tayelet sitting down and would try and talk to them with a smile on his face, this charming guy, and try and sell them his book. And it was sweet. And I remember he said to, I think I asked him like, oh, how do you get this courage? And he taught this Portuguese phrase to me. And it was, I think it's something to the effect of go, and if you're scared, go scared.
Boom.
Boom, right?
Right, like hits the heart. You're like, that's it.
That's it.
That's just the advice.
That's it.
You're going to be scared anyway. Do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
And so my philosophy is I just go. I take that step. I'm going to go out. I'm going to, if I'm considering whether or not I'm going to go out, even just outside of my house, and if I have no plans, I'm just going to go, because no good story, this is one of my phrases, no good story ever started with, so I decided to stay in and watch Netflix.
Unless it was Jewish matchmaking.
Unless it was Jewish matchmaking. Exactly.
Brian,
Yeah.
I am so glad that you came to have this professional and personal conversation with us. How can our listeners find you?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram. You can follow Brian Spivak. Just look me up. And also Barzel Media. Definitely give us a follow. We really appreciate it. Every view, every follow is super important as we're talking about this content creation space. And also LinkedIn also. Come find us.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Jewish Matchmaker podcast on ILTV. I'm Eliza Ben Shalom. And until next time, remember, matches make families, families make communities, and communities change the world.
I told you that big things were coming, and Bibi Netanyahu has not disappointed. $110 billion is now being invested into Israel's weapons production, and I cannot overestimate the significance of this decision. Israel is going independent over the next decade. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I so did. According to Netanyahu, this enormous decision came from a need to reduce our dependence on all players, including friends. He is, of course, referring here to the United States, who has massively enabled our military capabilities. Is this a good or a dangerous move, potentially angering our greatest ally? Or is this the dawn of a new day for Israel? As always, we will break it all down. This is the Meira K Show on JNS TV. Let's start from the very beginning. As always, we need the context, because without the history, we are not going to understand why this move makes such a big difference. I'm going to take you back to a starry night in 1947, where the state of Israel was about to be declared. The tension was palpable and the fear absolutely enormous. It was clear to all that if the declaration from the UN came through, the Arab countries around us would fight, as would the Arabs within the country. And Israel has a problem, as almost no countries would supply us with arms to avoid fueling a potential conflict. Specifically, the US and Britain, who, surprise, surprise, didn't have a problem providing the Arab countries with tanks and planes, basically put us under an embargo. So, what did Israel do? We have an enormous war to fight and no way to do so. Well, interestingly enough, Czechoslovakia, with Stalin's approval, agrees to sell Israel leftover Nazi German weapons for cash. They arrive in a massive airlift under Operation Balak. And to think of young Israelis who have just survived the Holocaust fighting against the Arabs with rifles that still had Nazi logos on them is just an unbelievable. The fact that we survived this war was a miracle in and of itself. I mean, did you know that we set up fake movie studios in what's known as the lipstick smuggling network for machinery that could create bullets, or used underground factories to create mortars, i.e. bombs, that basically didn't work but made such loud noise that the enemies were petrified? Anyway, we didn't really have the actual things that we needed to win, and I could geek out about the details of all the things that Israel did to protect itself back then without the military abilities, but this episode will never end, so let's refocus. It was a hard time for a struggling country, and honestly, it was a win that no one anticipated. To think that it was Russia that helped us to survive is kind of nuts, especially given the fact that the arms that they gave us were truly utter junk. But it is after this war that Israel realized it's going to need strong friends to help us defend ourselves, and it sets out to build diplomatic relationships to procure arms. In fact, right away, they find a new ally, and by 1967, we have a really strong ally in place, surprisingly, France. For 15 years, they had been providing us with a very modern air force supplied almost entirely by them. Why was France suddenly our best friend? Well, as often the case with allied countries, it was our shared enemy that united us. To them, Egypt was a problem. And for Israel, of course, being on their border, we knew that Egypt was a serious threat. France had wanted to take on Arab nationalism for quite a while because they were causing many different issues in their colonies and realized that Israel could potentially be a good partner in that. But when the war between the rebels in Algeria against France ended, the French started to have a change of heart. They suddenly wanted to make friends with these Arab countries because of all of the oil. And yes, you guessed right, they decided to throw Israel under the bus to obtain that. Just 3 days before the Six-Day War, the famous Six-Day War started, the French president de Gaulle imposed a total arms embargo on Israel in hopes of getting them to not preempt the war, something that there was a lot of whispers about. This, of course, didn't work, and Israel successfully, in one of the most astounding military feats of all time, used the air force that they had already been given and took out the majority of Egypt's air force on one bright morning in a war that lasted just 6 days. People often miss this part of the miracle. Had the war drawn out even a bit longer, Israel would not have had any of the arms that it needed because of this embargo. The French betrayal of Israel wasn't just in the arms issue. It was also in the fact that we had paid them for many more arms that they refused to send to us, keeping both the money and the products. Remember, we're a young state with little money or almost no money. But we did have brains, and so what did we decide to do about those 12 missile boats they refused to send to us? Well, on Christmas Eve of 1969, a year after the war had ended, Israeli sailors disguised as tourists sneaked onto the boats, fired up the engines, and sailed them out of France into a raging winter storm, while the French government was on holiday, and they made it to Israel. I mean, we had paid for those boats, but we had also paid for 50 planes, and with the planes in our possession starting to die out, we needed them. But France adamantly refused. Manufacturing seemed like the most obvious way forward, but we needed the know-how, i.e. the blueprints. How are we going to get that? Well, Israel launched a daring intelligence operation to steal the means of its own survival. The Mossad recruited a Swiss engineer at a company licensed to build the Mirage engines, the plane engines, who managed to smuggle over 2 tons of classified blueprints to Israel by swapping out the crates destined for the incinerator with old newspapers. Using those stolen plans, Israel's aerospace industries first cloned these engines to create the Nesher, our first real plane, which proved critical in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, shooting down over 100 of our enemy's planes. They then radically engineered the design by stuffing a massive American engine into this French airframe to create what we now know as the Kfir. It's a Frankenstein jet that was faster than the original and birthed Israel's modern high-tech defense industry. This betrayal taught Israel a lot, and really in many ways started the beginning of us creating our own defense systems. But again, we didn't have the ability to truly become the military superpower that we needed to defend ourselves. And then enters the US. During this time, they're in the midst of dealing with a Russian threat, right? And looking at the Cold War map, they realize that maybe backing Israel isn't such a bad idea. After years of a cold shoulder, the US starts to send us proper military planes. Remember, we're on the border with Egypt and Syria, who were then backed by the Soviets. But we needed more than just an air force. We needed tanks and ammo, and having learned our lesson from the French, who betrayed us just like this, we decide to diversify. Yes, some still came from the Americans, but not directly. Out of fear of angering the Arab countries, they used Germany as a middleman to secretly provide us with American tanks under the German reparations for the Holocaust. We also brought some stuff from the UK, and in a really interesting twist of events, during the Six-Day War, about 5 years beforehand, Egypt and Syria had left hundreds of Soviet tanks, brand new, in the desert when we defeated them. We then went swooped and took them over. We have, at this point, a mishmash of an army, which ends up proving to be a real issue come the Yom Kippur War, because the war took Israel completely by surprise. And to power the tanks that the UK had given us, we needed the right shells to fire. But they were petrified of facing an oil embargo as a potential consequence of siding with us, so they refused to send us anything. In a matter of days, we had almost no ammo. We couldn't use the Russian tanks, we couldn't use the UK tanks, and we were basically stuck. We had the tanks and planes, right? But none of the fuel or bullets. By the way, this is now the second time and comes back to why Israel's moving towards energy independence is so important. For those who don't get the reference, make sure to check out our previous episode on the oil deal Israel is doing with Egypt. Oil and military dependence come hand in hand, and countries make diplomatic decisions all the time based on their oil and trade needs. In the future, Israel will be able to stop countries from supporting our enemies because they can threaten their own oil embargoes on them. But one second, let's get back to the topic at hand. So we call on the US because it's the Yom Kippur War and we don't have the stuff that they need, and they, i.e. Nixon, decide to help. In what's known as Operation Nickel Grass, for 32 days they send us massive supplies to replenish our army, and it saves us. It isn't just shells, it's tanks and jets as well. But this comes with the ultimate price, the one that we are still familiar with till this day. It was golden handcuffs. It saved us, but when then they decided that the war needed to end for their own reasons, Israel was forced into a ceasefire. You see, within a few weeks, we had recovered from the surprise attack and had flipped the table completely. The Egyptians were surrounded in the desert with no supplies, but that didn't fit the plan the US had, hoping for a peace deal one day and knowing that if we really won, that would never happen. So they forced Israel to stop the war right in the middle and feed the Egyptians, or the supplies to Israel would stop. And here Israel kind of learned the lesson that this money was going to come with some serious strings attached. And this just didn't work for us. The Israeli defense establishment went into a manic state of production. The logic was simple. If we build everything ourselves, no one can ever turn off the tap. It's a similar logic to what we're feeling now. For about 15 years, from 1974 to 1987, Israel tries to become a mini superpower. We are still buying a tremendous amount from the US, but we are also manufacturing our own. We build our own tanks, the Merkava. We build the Galil rifle, so we don't need Europe. And we also invest heavily in creating our own plane called the Lavi. The idea is not to be dependent on the US for jets, because we are still buying the F-15s and F-16s from them. But it turns out that the US didn't like this. They don't want us building competition. So they tell us to cut the Lavi plan in a super controversial move here in Israel in 1987. It hardly passes in the government. It's only one vote that gets this whole operation cancelled. But Israel had been investing in this for ages, and the whole country was really behind it. Again, Israel, for the second time, does something that is bad for the country in order to keep the money from the United States. But it brings the birth of something new and important. What was Israel going to do with the thousands of engineers and brilliant minds that had been working on this jet project? Israel doesn't want them to leave the country, so they pour money into new departments within the aerospace industry. Since they couldn't build the plane, they want the tech to build the smartest missiles, radars, and drones that maybe could potentially destroy other planes. And that's what Israel did. Very quickly, it moved into high tech, but for the military. The Iron Dome, the laser beams, and cyber. But it was more than that. We're building optimized technology, designs, and codes. Remember, most Israeli men are military trained. They have extensive understanding of the needs for the army. And so, in many ways, the Lavi ending comes and starts to be a bit of a blessing in disguise. But what actually happens to the manufacturing of the real parts? The bombs, the bullets, the tanks, etc. Well, here comes the golden handcuffs bit. The US introduces a program of financial aid. We're all familiar with it at this point. There's a big misconception that the aid that the US sends us is just a free gift, and we know that this is false. The money needs to be used in the United States. Well, actually, there's a small caveat. When the arrangement was first signed, they were sending about $3 billion a year, roughly half of which was economic aid, something that Israel gradually phased out. This deal is different from what we are now familiar with because they agreed to allow Israel to spend 25% of it in Israel. But I'm going to get to that in a second. America has very specific reasons it funds us, and all of them are majorly beneficial to them. These are the top 5. They have political interests in keeping a strong ally in the Middle East. The money we are given needs to be used in the US, which bolsters their economy. They can force our hand on military decisions that don't align with their interests. They receive in return some of the best tech and intelligence that only Israel can provide, and they stop us from becoming serious competition to them in the arms manufacturing business. What happens next is a very weird hybrid situation. The 25% that we could spend here up until 2016 was given so that Israel could build out the tech. Think of it as kind of like an apology for them making us cancel a V. I mean, imagine a kitchen with Israel making the recipes, but the ingredients are all in the United States. Take the Iron Dome, for example. The radar and software are made in Israel, but the manufacturing of the actual missiles is in the United States. Similar with the Merkava tanks. We build the whole thing, but the engine comes from America. It's a weird hybrid situation. And why? Well, with all the money that the US was giving Israel to spend there, it didn't make sense to use our own money on manufacturing here when it would be technically free for us to have them make it. Think about it like this. We need 100,000 artillery shells. Option number one, with an Israeli factory, costs 50 million shekels from the Israeli taxpayer budget. Option number two, the American factory, costs zero from the Israeli budget because it's paid for by the US credit. It's kind of pretty obvious. Our tech just keeps getting stronger and stronger, but our blue-collar production factories start to shut down slowly, slowly, slowly. In 2016, with Obama's deal, this really took a turn. You see, they announced a huge deal of $38 billion in aid over 10 years, but 100% of it now needed to be spent in the US. And we decided to take it. All $38 billion goes directly to military arms. None of it is now economic support, which was a big shift. I mean, the irony of this is also just completely insane. On one hand, we're exporting the best tech in the world, worth billions and billions and billions. But on the other hand, come a real war, we are completely dependent on the US for the actual arms to fight. And then comes October 7th, and Israel sees the serious issues with this. Yes, we have the best tech, but we don't have the bombs needed to fight, or the bullets. And when Biden started to pause the shipments, we were in serious trouble. This dictated a huge amount of our war strategy and is a big part of why it took so long for us to get to the point that we're at now. And Bibi notices. And so, therefore, this is why this enormous announcement this week that for the next 10 years, $110 billion will be invested into our own manufacturing is so significant. It's about 15% of Israel's GDP. To put it into perspective, the aid that we received from the US over 10 years is about $38 billion. This is almost triple that. And whilst we don't yet know a huge amount of the deal, the reason for this is that Israel can be military self-sufficient even from our allies. We will still be buying some parts from other countries, but we are looking to build our independence. This is a deliberate shift as our concerns over future restrictions have proven to be legitimate. We saw the embargoes over the war, and it honestly can't continue. But it's not just making sure we don't have troubles in the future, it's actually going to enhance our operational secrecy and autonomy in conflicts and position us as a global arms exporter. Now, before you get too excited, it's important to note that this isn't happening tomorrow. This will take ages to actually get off the ground. Ages. And it's also no coincidence that this announcement was made just before Netanyahu's trip to Florida to meet with Trump. It will be used as a helping line for negotiations, which brings us really to the question of how the US is going to react. But there are other problems as well. Will the money be diverted from other critical national needs Israel might have? I mean, it's 50% of the GDP. Will it provoke other countries into a bit of an arms race as they get afraid of Israel's new enhanced capabilities? I mean, these are all questions we're going to need to ask. But truly, the most important question is, will this put us in a dangerous position with the US as it will take time for us to become independent? And whilst I don't have the full answer, I think it's pretty safe to assume that Bibi didn't make such an enormous decision without having checked with his friends in the White House first. I mean, you have to understand what it takes for a $110 billion investment. This is not a small, simple announcement. There have been months and months of preparation to make this happen. And if I were to guess, I'd say that there are many people, even in the American administration, who are actually kind of happy for this. Look, We know that the current administration is our friends, but it is not always going to be the case. And as the winds blow against Israel, not just in the Democrat Party, but significantly in the Republican Party now as well, it wouldn't surprise me if some of our allies are secretly pushing for this to ensure Israel's long-term safety. In many ways, this is honestly a win politically for them. With Stop Foreign Funding growing as a sentiment across the US, this may be a way to make those voters happy, but also ensure that Israel is protected against potential dangerous future administrations. I mean, I'm just going to say it. I think that the voters who think that this is a good idea are idiots. They just don't understand politics at all. This announcement is great for Israel. Yes, it's complicated, but it's not that good for the United States. They stand to lose a lot, but that's become the new norm. Uneducated people calling for things that actually are harmful to them. I mean, gays for Palestine. Anyone? As we've said multiple times, America actually gains a lot more from the funding of our military than Israel does. For Israel, yes, it's a survival mechanism, but in many ways it stops us from the things that we want. For America, it honestly just enhances their situation. But there's another reason that the timing of this is, again, strategic. Over the last few weeks, it has become clear that the US is planning on selling F-35s to Saudi Arabia in hopes to grow the Middle East anti-Iran alliance group. F-35s are like the most developed planes that we have at the moment. Saudi Arabia now has the same status as Israel, a major non-NATO ally. And we know that Trump's plan is for Israel and Saudi Arabia to normalize relations, which is why Israel hasn't really tried to stop the sales of these planes. But it doesn't mean we're happy about it. And Turkey, by the way, is also trying to get back into the F-35 program, which could be a real issue for Israel. Why am I bringing this up? Well, because whilst we really aren't interested in potential enemy countries having very high-flying planes, Netanyahu is going to use this announcement as leverage to kind of fight back. How exactly? We don't know. But potentially, could he be negotiating for better planes or other military wins? Yes. It's important to note that the US has a law since 2008, which we call the QME, the Qualitative Military Edge. The idea is that the US is legally required to keep Israel's military edge, meaning they cannot sell an Arab country in the Middle East anything equal to what Israel has. So how are they going to be selling this plane to Saudi Arabia? Well, to begin with, they've kind of dumbed down the planes a little bit, but also they have allowed Israel to modify and enhance the F-35s, and we're the only ones who can do so. This law doesn't run out like the money agreements we have with them that needs to be re-signed every 10 years. This is a law. The US president cannot legally sell advanced arms to an Arab nation without first submitting a report to Congress certifying that Israel's edge remains safe. Now, why would they do this? A few reasons. As we have said, the US actually gains a lot from a strong Israel. For one, the Middle East is important for trade and oil. America doesn't want to fight wars and specifically wants to make sure that a massive war doesn't erupt, therefore disrupting trade. With a strong military edge, Israel serves as a deterrent, and the US doesn't need to deploy troops. Israel is also stable, unlike the other Arab countries that change overnight, and many of these countries have Soviet tendencies. This policy actually started back then when Egypt and Syria were backed by the Soviets. We are the pro-American country which isn't changing and could keep Soviet proxies at bay. Also, because of our wars, we are constantly improving their arms. We are contractually obligated to share the data with them, and so it's basically battle testing for free, keeping them with a military edge as well. And so here we are, at the beginning of a crossroads and a shift. Whilst we're so used to Israel and America's relationship being so interdependent and so positive in that way, we are seeing that things need to change. In last week's episode, we discussed how Bibi said that there are many, many more surprises, and honestly, he didn't disappoint. These lessons that we are learning have unfortunately been a long time coming, but I truly believed that the shifts we are seeing towards a more autonomous Israel, less dependent and unbelievably militarily and economically strong, are almost messianic. These are amazing times. True, many things can happen. True, it's not happening tomorrow, but it's the right track, and for a long time we felt that maybe we had lost our way. Maybe there wasn't much to be hopeful for, but this is not the case. Relationships evolve. The US and Israel's dynamic needs to shift from what used to be a very intense dependency into something that's much more on the same bar. Hopefully, even though there might be some growing pains, this will be good for everyone in the end. The doctrine of need, free aid, being dependent on others, just needs to be a thing of the past for Israel. It really does. Look at how many examples we presented in this episode, and there are many, many more that just prove how dangerous our dependency is. And now we're shifting away from needing others. But not just that, we're becoming powerful in our own right, moving towards countries becoming dependent on us. The Israel of 2023 will be unrecognizable from the Israel of 2033, economically, militarily, and diplomatically. The country is at the start of a boom, and I, for one, am so grateful to be living through these times. Remember, America as an ally is of utmost importance because at the end of the day, it is the West, the Judeo-Christian values that are going to be able and capable of fighting against the infiltrators to our economies and countries. We are seeing these infiltrations across the spectrum, and Israel's just the forefront. We fight the wars for America, and that relationship is always going to be connected. The question is, at what point does Israel say, okay, back off a little bit? We can work together, but we cannot have our survival dependent on a president who might just end up hating us. And so if you're an American watching this episode and you're thinking, well, is this really bad for America? I'd say no. I'd say it's different. It's a shift. It's a shift away from the reality that we've known, which has had its benefits, but into something different. Something which, if you believe in Israel and you want Israel to survive, is actually massively, massively important for the future of our country. Both things can be true at the same time. Something can be good for Israel and good for America, and the relationship between these two countries is not going anywhere. As I said, this is going to take quite a bit of time for us to figure out. It is not happening tomorrow, but it is a correct and significant shift in the right direction. And finally, I've been waiting to do this episode for so long. I'm Ira Kay, and I will see you next time.
Well, thanks to Jewish National Fund USA, a record 90 college students are spending their winter break volunteering across Israel's north and south, restoring communities and strengthening their connection to Israel. Through the Alternative Winter Break program, they're supporting IDF soldiers working in agriculture and honoring fallen heroes. Joining us now from Israel are two of those students, Eyal Lubin and Samantha Levy. Thanks so much for being with us today. To start things off, where are you in Israel right now?
We're in Stero right now.
And why did you decide to spend your break volunteering in Israel? And what did you expect the experience to be like before you arrived? We'll start with you, Samantha.
My grandparents and parents always ingrained in me the importance of volunteering in Israel and contributing to the community. So I just thought I'd give back and come on the JNF trip.
And Eyal?
Very similar. I've always been intending. I spent a year here in yeshiva on a gap year, and I've always intended on coming back and giving back to the community and being able to volunteer here as much as possible. And thankfully, through JNF, I've been able to do so.
Well, we're certainly glad to have you here. Now that you are here in Israel, how does the reality compare to what you had imagined, and how does it feel to see the impact that you're having on the country's north and south communities?
It's really, really amazing. We've started the trip. We went all the way from the north, and now we're making our way down south. And being able to see the impact that we as students have been able to make, giving back to the community, and being able to watch our impact really show its deep causes and deep roots is amazing. And we keep giving back as much as possible, and we keep receiving as much as we're giving.
Now, Samantha, how do you think this experience will influence your Zionist identity and leadership back on campus?
It's taught me to be more proactive and to just really go for it. I think JNF is like the living, breathing proof of that if you think something is like unattainable, it really is.
And Eyal?
Yeah, I mean, I try to do as much as I can on campus for fellow Jewish students, and I think this trip has just really strengthened within me and given me a reinvigorated spirit to return to campus during the next semester and try to bring more energy and more positive enthusiasm about Judaism, about Zionism, about Israel as much as possible.
Well, that's definitely not something to be taken for granted. We know it's not an easy time right now for Jewish students on campus. Now, with several days still left in the program that you're doing now, what are you most excited to experience before you head home? We'll start with you, Eyal.
Okay. I am most excited to return back to my friends and my family, both on campus and off campus, and be able to return and share the experiences that I had on this trip, and be able to tell them that it's important that they too visit and that they too volunteer, that they do what they can to help support Israel, whether it be in Israel or in the diaspora in the United States, and do whatever we can as a Jewish community as a whole to support our brethren wherever we are.
And Samantha, is there something you're specifically looking forward to before you head back to campus?
I'm excited to see the various communities I've seen throughout the years after October 7th occurred, and how they have morphed into becoming such a positive environment after such a detrimental thing that occurred. I've, thank God, been here on many trips after October 7th occurred, and every time I just see living, breathing proof that the land of Israel will survive and thrive.
All right, well, we are certainly glad to have you both here. Eyal, Samantha, thank you so much for joining me. I just want to say, in addition to programs like the Alternative Break, Jewish National Fund USA is the largest provider of Israel engagement programs in the U.S., with various travel opportunities to Israel available, both for high school and college students like Eyal and Samantha. To learn more, you can visit jnf.org/education.
Now, before we continue, a quick word about how you can support independent journalism at ILTV. We're committed to bringing you original reporting and stories from Israel that often do not make it into the global spotlight. If you value diverse perspectives and reliable coverage, you can now subscribe through our app to help ILTV News grow. Just scan the QR code on your screen to help us expand our reporting. Continue delivering the kind of journalism that informs, challenges, and connects. Your subscription helps us do more than report the news. It helps us ensure that stories from the region are told with depth, integrity, and clarity. With your support, we can continue building a space for journalism that informs, connects, and inspires.
Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. We're live from Israel, bringing you the biggest headlines of the region. I'm India Naftali, and here's your roundup of the latest developments coming out of the region. And starting off, Iran responded sharply today, accusing Israel of trying to undermine its national unity. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Bakai said the Zionist regime is seeking to exploit the situation to sow division and called on Iranians to remain vigilant. He also accused Israeli and U.S. leaders of inciting violence as protests continue to spread across the country. At least 20 protesters have been killed in clashes with Iranian security forces, according to human rights groups. And continuing with Iran, U.S. President Donald Trump is issuing a direct warning to the Islamic regime, signaling he could use the same tactics he just used in Venezuela. Yesterday, the U.S. State Department's Farsi language account posted a photo of President Trump with a clear message in red text: "Don't play games with President Trump." The post showed Trump standing with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and other U.S. officials, adding, "President Trump is a man of action. If you didn't know, now you know." The message appears to reference Saturday's U.S. operation in Venezuela, where American special forces captured dictator Nicolas Maduro. Meanwhile, reports claim Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has an escape plan to flee to Russia with other senior officials if the situation deteriorates. Now, senior Syrian and Israeli officials are holding rare U.S.-mediated talks in Paris, a significant and unusual step aimed at stabilizing one of the region's most volatile borders. The meetings are taking place today and tomorrow, according to Axios, and are being mediated by U.S. envoy Tom Barak. This marks the fifth round of contacts between Israel and Syria, and the first in nearly 2 months after talks stalled amid deep gaps and the resignation of Israel's previously negotiator Ron Dermer. The renewed push follows pressure from U.S. President Donald Trump, who raised the issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu last week at Mar-a-Lago. Israeli officials say Netanyahu agreed to resume talks, but made clear Israel's security red lines will not be compromised. Discussions are focused on security arrangements, including demilitarizing southern Syria and protecting Israel's northern border and Syria's Druze community. Next, the IDF announced it has destroyed a Hamas terror tunnel approximately 2 kilometers long in northern Gaza. The army says the tunnel was located in Beit Lahia, near the Israeli side of the Gaza ceasefire line, known as the Yellow Line. The underground route is described as an offensive Hamas tunnel designed for attacks against Israeli forces and nearby communities. The operation was carried out by the Gaza Division's Northern Brigade, working with the elite Yahalom Combat Engineering Unit. The IDF says forces have been operating for months in the area, targeting Hamas infrastructure above and below ground. Meanwhile, the United States is working to move from Phase 1 to Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire plan. Israel has stressed that any further progress depends on security guarantees and the complete disarmament of Hamas. Take a listen to what Prime Minister Netanyahu had to say.
התנאי ההכרחי זה שהחמאס יתפרק מנשקו. אין אפשרות אחרת. זה תנאי הכרחי ויסודי למימוש תוכנית 20 הנקודות שלו. לא עשה שום ויתור בזה ולא הראה שום גמישות בנושא הזה.
Now in Judea and Samaria, the IDF conducted wide-ranging operations over the past week, arresting suspects and seizing terror funds. About 100 Palestinian suspects were arrested, and more than 1 million shekels, around $310,000 were confiscated. Operations took place across multiple sectors with a focus on the Hebron area. Nighttime raids were carried out in more than 24 villages. In Kabatia, 16 suspects were arrested and 26 illegal drones seized. In Kalkalia, 6 terrorists and arms dealers were arrested. Defense Minister Israel Katz has warned of the possibility of large-scale terrorist infiltration similar to the October 7th attack. He praised the campaign in northern Samaria, which led to an 80% drop in terror activity. The IDF says pressure on terror networks will continue. That's a wrap for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. Stay with us throughout the day for live updates as events continue to unfold. Scan the QR code for our apps. Until then, I'm Adia Naftali. Thanks for watching.
Welcome back to Axis of Truth on JNS, our last episode of the year. I'm Emily Schrader, and today we're speaking about how Christians in Iran are under assault, despite the regime's false claims that they respect freedom of religion. We'll also expose a scandal in Italy of charities for Palestinians, in fact being charities for Hamas. Plus, I'll sit down with Middle East expert Lisa Daftari to discuss the regional tensions and what we can expect to see in the coming months from both the U.S. and Israel. But first, I want to take us back to something that we discussed last week that I believe really needs to be addressed. So last week, I broke down the loser ideology of modern Jew hatred that's being peddled around by Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. But in her latest rant, Candace spread yet another libel that's been used for years now to drive a wedge between two historically oppressed minority groups in America that, frankly, have always been on the same side, the blacks and the Jews. Take a look.
Wake up and learn the true history of slavery, because that wasn't exactly a white men sport, okay? Jewish people were the ones that were trading us. Jewish people were in control of the slave trade. They've buried a lot of it, but it's there, and you can find it.
Jews are responsible for the slave trade. This claim is not just wrong, it's also a long debunked anti-Semitic libel. And yet here we are again because anti-Semitism is always a mutating pathology that never needs facts, only bitter, useful idiots like Candace to keep it alive. Let's start with the origin of this myth. The idea that Jews ran or profited from the transatlantic slave trade doesn't come from serious historians. It comes from openly anti-Semitic movements like the Black Hebrew Israelites and the Nation of Islam. Both are violently anti-Semitic, and both push this lie as a way to deflect responsibility and justify Jew hatred. Mainstream historians have repeatedly shown that Jews were a tiny, tiny fraction of slave owners in the Americas. In colonial America, Jews made up less than 1% of the population and owned far less than 1% of slaves. In places like South Carolina and Virginia, the slave economy was dominated by Christian European landowners and plantation elites. There is no evidence whatsoever of Jewish control over shipping, finance, or plantation systems. None. Even the most comprehensive database on the transatlantic slave trade, the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database itself, confirms this. The major slave trading powers were Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands. The operators were state-backed trading companies and Christian merchant elites. In fact, Jews were mostly excluded from these guilds and companies due to anti-Semitic restrictions and laws. Now, here's the part that people like Candace don't like to talk about. The transatlantic slave trade didn't begin with white Europeans. It was built and expanded on an existing slave trade run for centuries by Arab and Islamic empires, long before Europeans reached West Africa. The Arab-Islamic slave trade lasted over 1,300 years. It enslaved between 10 and 17 million Africans. And unlike the transatlantic slave trade, it included mass castration of male slaves, which is why there are not very many descendant populations today. This isn't disputed information. It's documented by historians like Bernard Lewis and Paul Lovejoy. And let's talk about abolition. Who actually ended slavery? It was Western civilizations alone who led the abolitionist movement. Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807 and used its navy to enforce that globally.